Picture this: George Orwell, a guy who basically built his entire worldview around one core idea. Truth is absolute. It's out there, unchangeable, not swayed by anyone's opinions or feelings. Sounds simple, right? But for Orwell, this was much more than just a belief. It was the cornerstone of his politics, morals, and how he thought people should relate to each other. Orwell didn't arrive at this understanding by sitting around and thinking about it. Nope, he learned it the hard way. When he was in the middle of the Spanish Civil War, he got a front-row seat to how journalists and intellectuals could twist facts beyond recognition. Things he witnessed with his own eyes were either altered, blown off, or entirely fabricated by the media. Stories reached the headlines about battles that never took place, while real acts of brutality got swept under the rug. All because ideology blinded smart people to the clear facts. This was a massive wake-up call for Orwell. It seriously worried him that the idea of an objective truth was fading away. It seemed like truth had turned into a political tool. If your side said something was true, then it was, magically, and if they said it wasn't, then it wasn't. Facts turned into just one more weapon in ideological warfare, and for Orwell, this threat was more frightening than any physical danger. He realized that when society tosses truth aside, everything falls apart. Justice needs solid facts for fair trials. Science can't function unless everyone agrees on basic facts. Democracy? Not going to work if voters lack accurate information. Even building trust in personal relationships falls apart when honesty is lost. When truth exits the scene, civilization collapses. Remember that famous line from Orwell's 1984? The character Winston Smith says that real freedom means being able to say 2 + 2 = 4. That simple math problem has a big message. It's about acknowledging reality, regardless of what's politically trendy or popular at the moment. 2 + 2 = 4. Period. It's truth beyond human moods or desires. In 1984, the oppressive rulers try to mess with this concept, claiming 2 + 2 = 5 if they say so. They argue since they can control people's thoughts, they can control reality itself. But this isn't just fiction. Orwell saw similar tactics being used by the totalitarian regimes of his time. Stalin would rewrite history to erase his enemies. Hitler pushed the idea that if you repeat a lie enough, it becomes truth. Orwell fought back, insisting that reality is stubborn and unmoving. You might convince people that 2 + 2 = 5, but guess what? Bridges built on that math will still fall apart. You can deny battles, but the casualties are still there. Claim your policies are succeeding, but people may still be starving. Reality can't be fooled no matter what propaganda says. This steadfastness of truth gave hope to those holding on to it. Orwell believed that everyday people have a natural ability to spot truth. Common sense acts as a defense against crazy logic. Observing the world gives us undeniable truths. Stones are hard, water is wet, and things fall when dropped. No amount of intellectual tricks can get rid of these facts. Problems start when folks are taught to doubt their own perceptions. Totalitarian regimes train people to trust official stories over what they see themselves. Notice something real that doesn't match what the party says? You must be mistaken. Remember something inconsistent with the official story? Your memory must be faulty. Over time, people lose confidence in their ability to distinguish real from fake, relying on authorities to define reality for them. Orwell dedicated his life to pushing back against this. He believed in sticking by the truth, trusting in common sense, and standing up to those who manipulate reality to suit their own purposes. He was insistent that everyone has the right and the responsibility to see the world as it truly is. No matter how powerful, no political entity can change the fundamental realities of life. Even the most cleverly crafted ideologies can't turn lies into truths. The world exists independently of our perceptions, and that independence is why we can truly understand and learn about it. This belief that objective truth exists was central to Orwell's whole way of thinking. Politically, he grounded his views on real observations of how different systems actually work. Morally, his focus was on genuine human needs, not just abstract theories. When he critiqued literature, he was curious whether authors depicted human experiences honestly. Everything had to be measured against reality. If ideas seemed attractive but led to bad results, they were worthless to him. That's why Orwell could support socialism while also criticizing socialist movements. He viewed socialism as dealing with truths about human equality and cooperation. Yet, he also observed that many socialist groups became corrupt, authoritarian, and dishonest. The truth behind socialist ideals didn't excuse the lies from their leaders. Orwell never felt torn between truth and his political ideas. He was firm in believing that genuine political progress couldn't be achieved without being completely honest about both successes and failures. Part 2. Language as the mind's battleground. George Orwell stumbled upon a fascinating insight that's captivated thinkers for generations. Language does more than just reflect reality. It shapes how we understand and interact with it. The vocabulary we have at our fingertips limits or expands the thoughts we're capable of having. This realization changed Orwell's perspective on politics, as he saw that controlling language means having power over our minds. It's no surprise oppressive governments always start by redefining important words and phrases. Orwell witnessed firsthand how this played out during his career as a journalist and political commentator. He saw politicians manipulating language to make it hard for opponents to express their ideas clearly. Complex political concepts were dumbed down into empty slogans, and essential differences were muddied with vague and sweeping statements. Eventually, people couldn't think clearly about political matters simply because they'd lost the appropriate words. It wasn't accidental. It was a strategic move. Take a look at how political language is often used. Leaders trying to justify violence don't call it what it is. Instead, they label it as peacekeeping, defense, or liberation. When they talk about their opponents, they choose words loaded with emotion. Rebels are dubbed terrorists, protesters become mobs, and critics get tagged as traitors. Such language choices strongly influence feelings about events, sometimes overshadowing the real facts. Orwell imagined where this manipulation could lead. What if a government twisted language so much that some thoughts were downright unthinkable? Picture a world where words like rebellion, freedom, or individual rights are scrubbed from the language. What if concepts like justice and truth were twisted to mean whatever the powerful wanted them to? This terrifying idea is what Orwell portrayed with New Speak in his book 1984. It's the ultimate form of thought control, a world where language is so stripped down that complex thinking seems impossible. Newspeak systematically reduces vocabulary choices. Every year, hundreds of words vanish, forcing synonyms into one unified, simplified expression. As language becomes more austere, people no longer have the tools for deep thinking, critical analysis, or independent judgment. It eventually gets so barren that only basic thinking is possible. But Orwell realized you don't need a dictatorship to see language corrupted like this. Language can decay just due to carelessness or not thinking things through. When we neglect the words we choose, we lose track of our own thoughts. We end up echoing others without fully understanding and adopting language that might not truly serve us. Bit by bit, our independent thinking starts to slip away. That's why Orwell emphasized clear and precise writing. Good writing is a sign of clear thinking, which is essential for human freedom. Messy writing usually indicates messy thinking, and messy thinking often leads to bad decisions, impacting individuals and society negatively. The quality of language impacts the quality of thought and, by extension, the quality of life. To protect language, Orwell offered some advice. He suggested using specific, concrete words instead of vague ones, opting for shorter words and straightforward sentences. He cautioned against using cliches, empty metaphors, and pretentious vocabulary. He encouraged writers to constantly ask themselves what they truly wanted to say and whether their language made it clear. Above all, they shouldn't use language to hide their real intentions from themselves or their audience. Honest language fosters honest thinking. These tips aren't just for writers. They're important for anyone who communicates. Everyone has a responsibility to use language clearly and truthfully. Whenever people throw around empty phrases or latch onto fake differences, they degrade public dialogue. But when someone sticks to clear definitions and honest descriptions, they're keeping the foundation for a real conversation intact. The fight for our freedom as humans happens piece by piece, in every sentence. We all join in this battle every single time we speak or write. Part 3. How Politics Twists Language. If your words can shape your thoughts, then to steer people's minds, you gotta start by messing with language. That's exactly what Orwell noticed happening during the 1930s and 40s. Various political groups caught on to the idea that by choosing their words carefully, they could influence public opinion about big issues. And it wasn't just your run-of-the-mill propaganda, it was much more sly. The goal was to mess up the words and phrases people use to understand politics. Orwell highlighted a whole bunch of ways politicians tinker with language. First, they love using euphemisms to sugarcoat unpleasant truths. So, mass murder is dressed up as ethnic cleansing. Torture is sanitized into enhanced interrogation. A military takeover is presented as a police action. And economic exploitation is turned into development assistance. These sugar-coated words make it harder for people to truly grasp what's going on. The sweet-sounding terms dull the shock you should feel when faced with awful realities. Another trick in the book is keeping political language so vague that it's tough to pin down. Politicians become experts in talking in ways that are hard to dispute. They throw around terms like freedom, democracy, justice, and security, but never really define them, They promise things like progress, reform, change, and improvement without ever getting into specifics. This vagueness protects politicians because it helps them avoid making commitments that could later haunt them and allows everyone to interpret their words in their own way, hearing just what they want to hear. Another tactic is bending the meaning of well-known words to fit certain political agendas. Freedom starts meaning whatever the leaders feel like it should. Democracy gets called any system that says it represents the people. Justice becomes whatever result is good for those with power. Peace is redefined as just a lack of fighting. These shifts in meaning aren't loudly proclaimed. They sneak in over time through repeated speeches, news, and official documents until people forget what the words originally meant. Orwell also observed that intellectuals in particular could easily fall for these tricks. They enjoy using complicated words and deep ideas, which makes them suckers for clever-sounding but shallow arguments. Academic lingo becomes a way to dodge real thinking about tough topics. The more abstract the language is, the easier it is to ignore reality. Intellectuals might discuss the philosophies of historical materialism while ignoring people who are starving. Politics messes with how things actually work by twisting cause and effect. Politicians make policy outcomes sound like they're out of anyone's control, similar to natural events. Unemployment is called a challenge rather than a mistake. Poverty gets labeled a management issue, not an injustice. War gets painted as something inevitable instead of a decision made by individuals with motives. This approach removes blame from actual human choices. If things just kind of happen on their own, who's to blame? Another way language gets muddled is by creating tons of unnecessary divides. Politicians split social classes into loads of categories, like upper middle class, lower middle class, and working class, masking the real issues of wealth and poverty. Instead of addressing capitalism and socialism head-on, they throw in terms like mixed economies or social market systems. These distinctions might sound smart, but often blur the true lines of power and resources. This complexity generally benefits those who want things to stay the same. Orwell also noted how political language tends to snatch up old metaphors that are losing their meaning. Politicians love throwing around expressions like towing the line, riding roughshod, and fishing in troubled waters, yet rarely stop to think about the imagery these expressions originally aimed to evoke. Though these metaphors have faded with time and don't paint a visual picture anymore, they still carry an emotional punch that influences how people feel about the topics at hand. It's ironic, because while the terms seem to offer lively speech, they actually dull our creative thinking. It's like giving politicians a way to dress up empty talk as something grand. They stick to tired expressions instead of dreaming up fresh thoughts. Overall, this kind of talk leads political discussions to drift far from tangible reality. Folks get heated over words, but seldom pause to see if these words line up with anything real. They form strong views on vague concepts without quite understanding their relevance to daily life. They become fluent in political lingo, which only muddles their ability to express real-world issues. Those in control count on this confusion because confused folks are easier to guide than those who are aware of their surroundings. The only way to combat this language twist is to stay sharp and treat words with the respect they deserve. Everyone should take responsibility for both the language they choose and the language they hear. If someone uses a fancy-sounding term to mask the truth, press them for directness. If the conversation goes in circles, demand clarity and specifics. And if someone tries redefining a word you already understand, remind them of what it truly means. When faced with an old, trite metaphor, encourage them to find newer, clearer ways to express it. It's an ongoing battle to keep your thinking clear, but it's vital for maintaining genuine political dialogue. Without this diligence, real democracy can't happen. Part 4. Toward the end of his life, George Orwell found himself in a bit of a bind, fighting on two different fronts. On one hand, he was vehemently opposed to all forms of totalitarian rule, whether it was fascism or communism. But he wasn't too fond of capitalism either, seeing it as unfair and essentially headed for failure. So, he was left promoting a middle path that left many scratching their heads. Although he called himself a democratic socialist, his version was different from the typical socialist movements of his times. Orwell's vision put freedom before control, valued decency over rigid beliefs, and focused on basic human needs rather than abstract theories. Orwell didn't arrive at socialism through reading. It was his direct experiences with poverty and inequality that shaped his views. Living among the impoverished in places like Paris and London, he witnessed the suffering that capitalism unnecessarily inflicted on people. When he studied conditions in northern England, he saw how industrial capitalism turned individuals into soulless machine parts. As a colonial police officer in Burma, he grasped how capitalism thrived on exploiting the less powerful. These revelations weren't just armchair thoughts. They were based on real experiences. But his take on socialism contrasted sharply with the Marxist models popular among the left during that era. He didn't care for complex theories of historical materialism or anything like that, nor did he think socialism was bound to happen or that it would solve all human problems. He wasn't interested in restructuring society using radical ideas about human nature. Instead, his socialism was simple and practical. He dreamed of a world where ordinary people could live decent lives without the shadow of poverty, exploitation, or oppression hanging over them. For Orwell, any form of socialism needed to be democratic. He believed that concentrating power in the hands of a few would always become corrupt and oppressive. It didn't matter if they called themselves capitalists, fascists, or communists. Power corrupts everyone equally. To prevent this, the people affected by decisions had to be the ones making them. This meant ensuring true democracy, not the fake version that totalitarian regimes like to sell. He saw democracy and socialism as not only compatible, but necessary for each other. Genuine democracy couldn't survive under capitalism because economic inequality translates directly to political inequality. The rich would buy influence, marginalizing the poor from having a real say in politics. Likewise, socialism needed democracy to operate. Proper economic planning required the consent and engagement of the populace. If socialism were imposed from the top, it would just turn into another kind of tyranny. Both democracy and socialism had to grow together to truly work. This belief separated Orwell from many of his socialist contemporaries, some of whom were willing to allow temporary dictatorships to kickstart socialist economies. They thought short-term oppression was a price worth paying for long-term equality. Orwell dismissed this notion, understanding that temporary dictatorships often don't stay temporary. Once someone gains absolute power, they usually find reasons to hold on to it. The means shape the ends, not the other way around. An authoritarian route to socialism would only lead to another rigid authoritarian regime, regardless of its economic policies. He also felt that his version of democratic socialism needed to be distinctly English. Orwell didn't want to slap one-size-fits-all principles onto every society globally. Political systems had to grow from specific cultural contexts and traditions. English socialism had to reflect English values like fair treatment, personal privacy, and gradual change. It couldn't just copy models from countries like Russia or Germany. It had to suit the unique English conditions and character. This wasn't a claim that English socialism was superior. It was about making sure political systems mesh with the people they're designed to serve. Picture trying to grasp what democratic socialism might look like in the real world. Orwell didn't map out a blueprint, but he did suggest some core principles. He believed that the big industries should be owned by the people and operated to benefit everyone, rather than just a handful of profit seekers. Decisions on production and distribution wouldn't be left solely to the bosses or executives. They would involve both the workers and the consumers. Even though wealth wouldn't be evenly distributed, it would be a lot more equitable than what capitalism offers. Orwell imagined political freedoms expanding instead of being restricted. Education would be accessible to everyone no matter their background. His vision was about creating a society where everyone could pursue their aspirations and contribute to the common good. Achieving this didn't mean a violent uprising. Orwell envisioned a peaceful democratic transition that preserved the positives of British tradition while eliminating its biggest flaws. This shift wasn't about using force. Small property owners would still retain their rights and personal freedoms would be protected. It was more than just political and economic change. It was about transforming how people thought of one another. People would need to learn new ways of caring for and supporting each other, stepping away from the self-interest that capitalism fosters. Orwell understood that this transformation wouldn't be easy and wasn't guaranteed to succeed any better than capitalism or avoid the pitfalls that previous socialist attempts faced. Still, he felt it was worth the effort because the alternatives, like rampant inequality and chaos from capitalism or the tyranny of fascism and communism, were far worse. Democratic socialism appeared to be the only path to a society that was both prosperous and free. And even if it didn't succeed, making the attempt was better morally than accepting the status quo or succumbing to oppression. For Orwell, it wasn't about finding flawless solutions. It was about choosing between hope and despair. Part 5. The Inevitable Grip of Power. George Orwell had a keen eye for something often ignored by political theorists. Power goes beyond being just a tool. It changes everyone who handles it. It makes its own set of rules, develops its own agenda, and finds excuses for its actions. Even if someone begins with the noblest of intentions, power eventually reshapes their ambitions and character. This explains why revolutions frequently lose sight of their founding principles. Orwell realized this tough truth during the Spanish Civil War. He initially thought he was signing up to fight for socialism, democracy, and human rights. But when he got there, he discovered a chaotic mix of factions. each claiming to be the true voice of the people. Among the leftists, the Communist Party was a major force, yet they were as busy fighting other socialist groups as they were battling fascists. They even went so far as to arrest, torture, and execute people who had recently been their allies, rationalizing these actions by saying that unity was essential for victory. However, to Orwell, something deeper was at play. The Communist Party wasn't merely making poor decisions or cracking under pressure. They were caught up in the unstoppable momentum of power. Once they secured their position within the left, they felt compelled to crush any perceived threat to their dominance. Other socialist factions became threats simply by existing with different viewpoints. Divergent ideas on approaches and tactics were seen as acts of betrayal or anti-revolutionary thought. The party couldn't tolerate any authority apart from their own. This wasn't solely a result of malicious individuals. It was a structural feature of wielding power in a volatile environment. Any group not eliminating its competition would ultimately fall to them. This understanding profoundly influenced all of Orwell's later political writing. He realized that political systems are not neutral platforms for implementing policies. They are living entities that generate their own necessities and motivations. Democratic systems promote certain behaviors while hindering others, just as authoritarian ones lead people down different paths. Systems concentrating power in the hands of a few tend to end up similarly, notwithstanding the ideologies or personalities involved. Consider what happens when a small group seizes control of a society. They are quickly met with practical problems: retaining power amid potential rivals, extracting resources from the population to fund their rule, suppressing organized opposition, and maintaining loyalty among their followers. These challenges push them toward similar solutions regardless of their original intentions. They establish secret police to sniff out threats, build propaganda machines to mold public opinion, create informant networks to monitor citizens, rely on intimidation and force to quell dissent, and mete out rewards and punishment to ensure loyalty. None of these measures might have been on their initial to-do list. The revolutionaries who overthrew the Russian Tsar didn't likely foresee creating something worse, but each action tightening their power made the next step inevitable. Once secret police are in place, targets must be found to justify their existence. Once enemies are identified, they must be treated as such. Once violence is used, stopping becomes a sign of weakness. The domino effect of power sets in, driving the system forward beyond anyone's original intentions. Those in charge find themselves ensnared by the very systems they've constructed. Orwell observed this cycle in every oppressive regime he studied. The Nazis didn't begin with mass genocide in mind, but the twisted logic of their racial beliefs inevitably steered them toward that horrifying end. When the Soviet communists first started out, they didn't plan on causing widespread starvation among millions of peasants. Their main goal was to speed up industrial growth, and if that resulted in a lot of hunger, they were prepared to see it as a necessary sacrifice. This system they put in place pushed them towards a mindset where leaders constantly felt they had to go to more drastic measures. The choices boiled down to showing weakness, compromising, or betraying the movement. To them, actions showing true dedication to the revolution were the harshest ones. That's why Orwell emphasized the importance of splitting and controlling power, rather than giving it all to people who seem morally upright. Even the most virtuous individuals can go astray with too much authority. To prevent this, power needs to be kept in check. No one person or group should have the means to overpower everyone else. It's not just about teaching people to be good. It's about creating systems with built-in checks and balances, regardless of who's in charge. Openness, responsibility, and regular opportunities for ordinary people to challenge those in power are essential. Orwell also understood that these protective measures are often at risk. Those in power frequently have incentives to bypass or dismantle these constraints. They'll justify that dire circumstances call for exceptional measures. They'll argue that their opponents don't play by the rules, so they don't deserve protection. They'll claim efficiency requires centralizing power, and debate only leads to a standstill. Each of these points might seem reasonable on its own, but together they make way for authoritarianism. The real defense against this is for everyday people to stay vigilant. People need to be prepared to uphold these institutional safeguards, even if it seems like they're blocking beneficial policies. They should hesitate before granting special powers, even to leaders they've grown to trust. They must insist on transparency and accountability, even when secrecy might seem like the simpler path. And most importantly, they must remember that power has the potential to corrupt, even those with the noblest intentions. The price of freedom? It's staying alert, not just against outside threats, but also against the natural inclination of power to corrupt its holders. Point 6. George Orwell really nailed a key point about 20th century politics by distinguishing between patriotism and nationalism. Many people mix these terms up, using them interchangeably, but Orwell understood that they reflect completely different connections to one's country and fellow citizens. Patriotism is centered around love and service, while nationalism often springs from insecurity and can lead to aggression. Understanding this difference is crucial for anyone wanting to engage in politics in a positive way. It's one of Orwell's most significant insights for today's political landscape. Orwell explained patriotism as a commitment to a certain place and lifestyle. Patriots have a deep affection for their nation because they know it well. They appreciate its landscapes, culture, achievements, and character. They recognize the country's flaws, but also see opportunities for improvement. This love is concrete and focused, not some vague concept or ideology. Patriots aim to enhance their country, not necessarily surpass all others globally. This love is protective, not aggressive. They want to preserve their nation's important traditions and institutions without forcing their way of life on others. They understand other nations have their own customs that fit them. Their patriotism makes them good neighbors, not threats. They can admire and respect other cultures without feeling threatened. Nationalism, however, operates on a different wavelength. It's not so much about love for one's country as it is about asserting its superiority over others. The nationalist mindset is competitive rather than understanding. They need their country to come out on top in every way, or their sense of identity seems endangered. Accomplishments at home only matter if they demonstrate dominance over competitors. This mindset can distort their perception of reality. They can't admit to any faults or failures because that would undermine their perceived superiority. Likewise, they can't see the good in other countries, fearing it might challenge their own country's supremacy. In this view, facts become just tools in a propaganda war instead of methods to develop better strategies. Nationalists often end up with flawed judgment, unable to make the straightforward assessments necessary for political progress. Orwell pointed out that nationalism often focuses on symbols rather than true issues. Nationalists are deeply invested in things like flag waving, national anthem protocols, and grand ceremonies. They might get outraged if these symbols aren't respected properly, yet they may not care whether their country's policies actually help its people. It's almost like the show of respect is more important than ensuring everything functions well. This fixation on appearances allows politicians to distract nationalists from policy failures by playing on emotions with pomp and spectacle. Orwell also described what he called transferred nationalism. Some intellectuals can't maintain a strong emotional connection to their own country because they're too aware of its flaws and contradictions, but they still yearn for the fulfillment of supporting a powerful movement. So they transfer these nationalist feelings to foreign countries or big ideas that seem purer and more noble than their own societies. You'd see Western intellectuals who favored communism look up to Stalin's Soviet Union. Conservative thinkers might idealize some imagined past civilization. In both cases, the distance made it easy to romanticize since they didn't have to confront the uncomfortable reality. These transferred nationalists could hold on to their beliefs because they never lived with the shortcomings of the systems they admired. Orwell also noted negative nationalism as being characterized mostly by hostility towards other groups rather than affection for one's own. Anti-Semitism is like a form of negative nationalism, lacking any hopeful outlook for society's future. It's similar to the way some thinkers in Europe criticize America. This sort of nationalism doesn't ask for constructive solutions or a truthful examination of different options. It just provides emotional support. It lets people feel morally superior without needing to take any real action for positive change. Rather than pushing frustration and resentment toward something good, it channels it into hatred. The appeal of nationalism is easy to see. It gives people a sense of identity and belonging, which many seek. It simplifies confusing issues about political loyalty and what's right or wrong, drawing clear lines between friends and foes in a complex world. It allows ordinary folks to feel connected to significant historical events. For many, it fills a gap left by the decline of traditional religious beliefs. Yet, Orwell believed that the price paid for these emotional comforts is way too high. Nationalism makes reasoned political discussion almost impossible because it resists facts that clash with its emotional commitments. This leads to policies driven more by prestige and competition than by actual human needs. It stirs international strife to fulfill the nationalists' psychological desires instead of serving any practical purpose. Worst of all, it can make people give up their liberty and well-being for vague goals like national glory or ideological purity, as a nationalist puts the identity of their group above their own. Orwell proposed that patriotism is a much healthier path. A patriot keeps their own judgment intact while genuinely caring for their community. They can love their country without having to hate others, and they can work on improvements while recognizing current problems. They respect their traditions without being bound by them. Their love is mature and realistic, not naive or overly idealized. In democratic societies, understanding this difference between patriotism and nationalism is key. Democracy needs individuals who can think for themselves but still care enough about their community to participate. Patriots make excellent democratic citizens because they balance emotional attachment with clear thinking. On the flip side, nationalists are a threat to democracy since their emotional ties usually overpower logical thinking. In a democracy teeming with nationalists, there's a risk it will lose its democratic essence and become a battleground where different groups try to impose their beliefs on everyone else. Part 7. Class, Status, and Human Dignity. George Orwell had an incredible understanding of class that went beyond what many political thinkers could comprehend. For him, class wasn't just a theoretical social concept or a simple economic relationship. It was intimately connected to human dignity. It involved the daily insults and the little acts of cruelty that people impose on each other simply because they're in a position to do so. It was also about the psychological impact of inequality on both the oppressors and the oppressed. Most importantly, it was about the obstacles preventing people from truly interacting with each other as equals. Instead of learning about class from books, Orwell got to grips with it through his own life experiences. He was born into what he called the lower upper middle class, a weird spot in England's social ladder. His family had big ambitions, but lacked the money to match. They looked down on those below them, yet faced snobbery from those above. This put Orwell in a unique position to understand how class awareness functions at every level of society, influencing how people regard themselves and others. Orwell's real education on class began when he deliberately left his place in the social hierarchy. After quitting his job with the Imperial Police in Burma, he spent time living among the poorest in Paris and London. He took jobs like washing dishes in upscale restaurants, where he saw affluent customers treating staff as if they were invisible. He stayed in homeless shelters, observing the intricate rules and systems that existed even among those with nothing. He understood that class differences ran deeper than just money. They reflected ingrained beliefs about human worth and dignity. What shocked Orwell most was how profoundly the class system twisted the personalities of everyone involved. Working-class folks developed habits of submission and deference, making it hard for them to stand up for themselves. They began to accept their lower status, thinking of themselves as less capable or deserving than those above them. This mental damage was often worse than their financial hardships. It blinded them to the unfairness of their situation and the possibility of change, causing them to unwittingly reinforce their own oppression. But the upper classes had their own problems. They acquired a sense of entitlement and arrogance, blunting their empathy towards others. They fooled themselves into believing their privileges were earned rather than inherited. They constructed elaborate justifications for inequality, making them feel virtuous while continuing injustice. Most alarmingly, they lost the capacity to form meaningful connections with those from different classes. They struggled to view working-class people as individuals with their own minds, emotions, and aspirations. Orwell saw these dynamics up close during his exploration of working-class life in northern England. He was deeply affected by the grace and intelligence of the coal miners and factory workers he encountered. They had an acute awareness of their situation and developed clever ways to survive hard times. Yet, they also learned to mask their true thoughts and feelings around middle-class visitors like Orwell. Showing anger or discontentment would only be taken as evidence of their unfitness for better roles, so they often pretended to be thankful and happy when they weren't. Meanwhile, the middle class had, according to Orwell, a talent for ignoring what was right in front of them. They could travel through industrial zones without acknowledging the poverty and filth. They employed domestic staff without considering the conditions these workers went home to. They supported imperial endeavors without a thought to the human consequences. This selective ignorance wasn't merely selfishness, it was a psychological tactic that allowed them to maintain their self-image as decent people while being part of an unjust system. Orwell knew that keeping class lines intact relied more on countless subtle rituals and assumptions than on any formal regulations or laws. As folks go about their daily lives, strolling, chatting, eating, and mingling, it's usually pretty obvious to onlookers where they stand on the social ladder. From a young age, we've picked up on these habits and cues, practicing them so often they become second nature. Even if individuals from different backgrounds find themselves in the same space, they're often worlds apart. Each group has its own language, a unique take on what's appropriate, and a distinct sense of how others should treat them. This can make it pretty tough for people from different social classes to really understand one another. However, Orwell discovered that under certain conditions, class barriers could crumble, even if just temporarily. During his time in the Spanish Civil War, he experienced moments where it seemed everyone was on equal footing, regardless of their backgrounds. Facing the same dangers and hardships leveled the playing field, making social status irrelevant. People connected as individuals rather than mere representations of their class. Orwell concluded these divisions weren't inherent. They were created by society. With the right changes, they could be dismantled. That's why his vision of socialism emphasized human relationships beyond just finance or property. He envisioned a world where a person's job or origin didn't prevent them from being seen as equals. Achieving this meant more than just redistributing wealth or altering property ownership. It required shaking up deep-seated class cultures and habits. People needed to learn how to truly see and respect one another. Orwell knew this transformation wouldn't be quick or simple. Awareness of class is deeply ingrained in our speech, education, family traditions, and communities. Just proclaiming equality wouldn't erase the entrenched attitudes built over generations of unequal treatment. Meaningful change required clear, proactive steps to build new systems and interactions that promoted equality. It also involved staying vigilant against potential new hierarchies or statuses that might emerge. The goal wasn't to erase all differences between people, but to ensure those differences didn't lead to some being valued less than others. Part 8. The individual against the collective. For him, the true battle for freedom isn't fought through politics or wars, but within our own minds, where we decide whether to think independently or let others shape our ideas. Everything else depends on which side wins this internal struggle. Orwell came to this realization after experiencing the realities of collective movements firsthand. He fought against fascism in Spain, initially believing that joining forces was the way to protect individual rights. Yet he discovered that even good-intentioned collectives often quash personal judgment in favor of group loyalty. People start accepting the group's narrative instead of forming their own viewpoints, and questioning the party line marks you as a dissenter. Over time, the ability to think independently fades away. This pressure doesn't always come from leaders deliberately manipulating the masses. Often, it happens naturally when people join groups. There's an intrinsic desire to belong to something bigger and more meaningful than oneself. The sense of unity and shared purpose is intoxicating, but it often costs us our independent thinking. The more people commit to a group identity, the harder it becomes to confront truths that challenge their shared beliefs. Orwell observed this in every political group he encountered. Conservatives tended to overlook the flaws of capitalism or the moral failures of imperialism. Socialists ignored the atrocities committed under Stalin or the inconsistencies in Marxist theory. Even pacifists missed how their stance on peace depended on others willing to use force. Each group erected mental barriers to shield themselves from ideas that threatened their core beliefs, effectively stopping their learning because they couldn't face when reality didn't align with their ideology. He coined the term doublethink for the deepest form of this phenomenon. It's when someone can entertain two opposing ideas without recognizing the contradiction. In his novel, 1984, a party member might believe Big Brother is all-powerful, yet constantly under threat, that the party is infallible while frequently correcting its past mistakes. They don't see the contradictions because their beliefs surface when handy and vanish when they're not. This creates a mental compartmentalization where conflicting thoughts don't interact. Yet Orwell argued that doublethink isn't exclusive to totalitarian states. It pervades every society where desires clash with reality. In democracies, politicians make promises they know are unfeasible because voters prefer comforting illusions over realities. Shoppers buy goods they don't need, tricked by advertisements into fabricated desires. People support policies that aren't in their best interest to satisfy a need to feel superior. In these situations, individuals choose reassuring falsehoods over unwelcome truths. To combat doublethink, Orwell proposed common sense. This doesn't mean diving into philosophical or scientific complexities. It's the simple act of seeing things for what they are and holding on to that understanding. Common sense reminds you that rocks are hard, water is wet, and if you drop something, it falls. It insists that contradictory statements can't be simultaneously true and that your personal experiences outweigh any official narrative. Here's the big idea. No matter what anyone else tries to tell you, 2 plus 2 will always equal 4. These simple truths create a solid base that can't be shaken, no matter how clever someone tries to spin it. In a world full of people who want you to see things their way, using good old-fashioned common sense takes some work. You need to trust your own eyes, even if they tell you something different than what everyone else believes. Be open to changing your mind when you learn something that challenges what you thought before. And don't pretend to know things you don't. Be honest about it. Most importantly, don't just believe something because everybody else does. Think for yourself. Standing firm in your own thoughts can be a bit lonely and challenging, but it's the best way to avoid being misled. Orwell figured out that keeping this kind of freedom in your thoughts wasn't something most people were willing or able to do. Many find it easier and more comforting to go along with a group that tells them what to think, favoring collective errors over standing alone in their rightness. But Orwell believed that even just a few independent thinkers could have a huge impact. These individuals could see reality clearly when others are lost in group fantasies. They could remember the facts when everyone else tried to forget them. They could stick to truth and logic, which are vital for any real discussion on politics. In the darkest of times, they could keep the hope alive that things could get better. This is why Orwell emphasized that individuals should resist the urge to conform. You can't just have good political systems. You need courageous, independent people to make them work. Democracy needs people who think critically about their choices. Science needs researchers who follow the evidence wherever it leads. Journalism depends on reporters who tell the truth, even if it's not popular. Progress in any area comes from individuals who stand up when the majority is wrong. However, Orwell also knew that standing alone can only go so far. No one is totally free from the influence of their culture, upbringing, and connections. The goal isn't perfect objectivity, but having enough independence to think clearly and critically. It's about finding the right balance between being part of society and maintaining your own judgment. It's about participating without losing what makes you, you. This balance is hard to get right and easy to lose, but it's essential for any society that wants to remain open and effective. Part 9. George Orwell got a real insider's look at imperialism during his 5-year gig as a colonial police officer in Burma. This experience let him see how empires operate from the ground up, impacting both those under the heel and those in control. He came to view imperialism as a corrupting force, leaving long-lasting psychological damage. He realized it wasn't just about money or military might. It was fueled by a basic human desire to feel superior. Arriving in Burma at 19, Orwell had the typical notions about the British Empire's so-called civilizing mission. He believed British rule was all about bringing order, progress, and enlightenment to people deemed incapable of governing themselves. Instead, he found a situation rooted in fear, resentment, and misunderstanding. The British maintained their hold through force, with the threat of more violence always in the air. The Burmese went along because they had no real choice, but they resented their rulers and dreamed of the day they could kick them out. There was no gratitude, no genuine teamwork, and no honest move toward any civilized ideal. What really hit Orwell was how this system affected the British officers running the show. They had to put on a front of being in charge, even when they felt insecure or uncertain. They had to make decisions about cultures they didn't understand and govern people whose languages they couldn't speak. They were enforcing laws that often seemed nonsensical in the local context. Maintaining this facade of confidence and wisdom that they didn't possess eventually damaged their self-awareness. Orwell captured this twisted mindset in his famous essay, Shooting an Elephant. As a cop, he once had to deal with a rampaging elephant that had killed a man. By the time he got there, the elephant had calmed down and wasn't a threat anymore. The sensible thing would have been to wait for its owner to handle the situation, but a crowd had gathered, eager to see what the white officer would do. They expected him to shoot the elephant because that's what a strong imperial officer would supposedly do. Even though Orwell knew shooting the elephant was unnecessary and wasteful, he also knew backing down would make him appear weak. His authority hinged on always looking confident and decisive, so he shot the elephant, not because it was right, but because the rules of imperialism required it. In that moment, he realized he was stuck in a role that forced his actions. The system that made him the boss of others also took away his control over himself. Orwell learned that imperialism shackles both oppressors and the oppressed. Imperial officials couldn't afford to seem unsure, kind, or respectful of other cultures, as it would undermine the very foundation of their power. They had to always project superiority, even when they knew they lacked the knowledge or moral high ground. This constant act became a mental burden, distorting their personalities and affecting their relationships with others. Orwell also saw how imperialism messed with the minds of the colonized. Some of them started to believe that British rule was somehow superior to their ancient traditions. They adopted British habits and values while looking down on their own roots. This kind of mental colonization often caused more damage than the political or economic kinds, creating deep divisions between those siding with the empire and those resisting it. These divides often stuck around even after countries achieved independence. However, Orwell didn't see imperialism as something only from the pages of history. He recognized it as a mindset that could pop up elsewhere, wherever people seek to dominate others. Whenever you see a group claiming they're naturally above another, you're bound to spot folks acting the same way. The way the British elite treated the working class bore a striking resemblance to how white colonizers behaved towards the people they dominated. This mindset involved a belief in a natural hierarchy, flaunting their supposed superiority and growing resentment from all sides. And you saw it play out in class relations right there in England. This insight influenced Orwell's views on authoritarian regimes like fascism and communism. These movements acted like they wanted to end old forms of oppression, but wound up inventing new, all-encompassing types of control instead. In Nazi Germany, the plan was to create a racial empire that would treat Slavic people much like European countries had historically treated those in Africa and Asia. At the same time, the Soviet Union formed an empire grounded in ideology, forcing other nations to submit in the name of socialist unity. In each situation, the talk about freedom was just a cover for another version of colonial thinking. The leaders convinced themselves that their rule benefited the very people they were subjugating. Orwell believed the only way to break out of this cycle was to let go of the superiority mindset that fuels all imperialism. This meant understanding that no group has an inherent right to dominate another, realizing that cultural differences don't automatically make one better, and insisting that political and economic systems should serve the needs of their people, not just those in power. But Orwell also knew that breaking free from this imperial mindset wouldn't be a walk in the park, because the desire to feel superior is a deeply rooted part of human nature. Often, those who've been oppressed don't dream of ending the oppression entirely. Instead, they imagine being the oppressors themselves. Revolutions that kick off by fighting imperial rule can end up creating new types of dominance. This vicious circle continues because the core psychology remains unchanged. Only by tackling this mindset head-on and working hard to overcome it can societies hope to genuinely equalize the playing field for different groups. Part 10. Orwell had a bit of a mixed relationship with intellectuals. He was definitely in their league, but he didn't hold back on criticizing them for being deceitful, arrogant, and disconnected from everyday people. Orwell figured that smart folks had a big part to play because they influenced how the public perceived things and had access to information not everyone got. If they failed, it wasn't just their own mistake. It messed up logical public debates and left democracies in the dark when making key decisions. What really rubbed Orwell the wrong way was how intellectuals often chose abstract ideas over concrete evidence. They'd latch onto some grand theory even if it harmed people, bending or ignoring facts that didn't fit their worldview. They'd use their intelligence to back beliefs they felt strongly about rather than carefully thought through. By doing this, they stopped being truth seekers and turned into cheerleaders for whatever ideology captivated them. Orwell noticed this most in their views on Soviet communism. In the 1930s and 40s, a lot of Western thinkers stood by Stalin despite clear evidence of his ruthless behavior. They might claim that mass executions were essential for socialism or describe the show trials as justified crackdowns. Whispers about labor camps were dismissed as capitalist smears. It wasn't that they weren't aware, it was just that admitting the harsh truth would have crushed their ideal of a socialist uprising. These intellectuals shifted their loyalty from their own countries to the Soviet dream, needing to believe that a just society existed somewhere. This emotional pull blinded them to the grim reality of Soviet practices. They saw what fit their idealized vision and ignored the rest. Even when Soviet misdeeds were undeniable, they'd call them temporary issues or necessary evils. They couldn't accept that their dreamland was just another form of tyranny. Orwell didn't just point fingers at left-leaning intellectuals. Conservative ones did the same dance when defending capitalism, traditional social structures, or empire building. They'd play down or completely ignore the harm these systems caused while they exaggerated the benefits. With fancy economic or philosophical arguments, they'd defend systems that mostly benefited them. Anyone who spoke against them was branded as naive and unrealistic about the world's complexities. In every case, their intelligence was used to dodge making straightforward moral judgments. Orwell thought this intellectual rot came from a few sources. For one, intellectuals often depended on institutions with a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. Universities, think tanks, newspapers, and publishers often had wealthy patrons or corporate sponsors expecting scholars to toe the line with the broader political and economic objectives they had. Straying too far could mean being ousted from respectable venues. Plus, intellectuals often mingled in circles that shielded them from the consequences of the ideas they promoted. They could advocate for radical economic changes without suffering any fallout. They might support imperial ventures without ever facing the people being colonized. They could discuss wars from a distance because they weren't out there in the trenches. Living in such bubbles made it easy to view real human suffering as just collateral damage in their grand ideological pursuits. They lost sight of the everyday realities entwined with their sweeping political visions. So, in Orwell's view, intellectuals often fell into what he termed power worship. They gravitated toward movements and leaders who appeared to be shaping history rather than reacting to it. They had a desire to be part of significant historical shifts. This tendency made them more likely to excuse the dubious methods used by those in power, as long as the powerful seemed on the right side of history. They started confusing impactful historical actions with moral virtue. They overlooked that the events with the most historical bang were often the ones leaving the most ethical wreckage. Orwell believed that for intellectuals to do their best work, they needed to stay true to intellectual honesty, regardless of the political consequences. This meant accepting truths even when they went against their own beliefs, and being willing to criticize movements and leaders they once backed if they went astray. It took the bravery to stand alone when necessary. Above all, their loyalty had to be to the truth, above any political goals or social circles. Truth had to be the priority, much more important than achieving success, consistency, or approval from others. Living up to this standard of honesty wasn't easy. It required constant reflection and the humility to admit mistakes. It demanded resisting the pressure to just follow the crowd and becoming a loyal supporter. It meant understanding that thinking independently could make them feel isolated at times. Not many intellectuals could uphold this demanding standard consistently, but Orwell believed that even those who often missed the mark still served an important role by sometimes voicing truths others were too afraid to speak. He also argued that intellectuals had a duty to write about political issues with clarity and honesty. With their education and talent for language, they had a unique ability to influence public opinion. If they obscured things instead of clarifying them, they hindered productive public conversations. And if they used their influence for personal gain rather than the public good, it would be a betrayal of the trust society placed in them. Orwell saw an intellectual who deliberately confuses crucial truths as more dangerous than someone simply ignorant. Once you're aware of something, you have the responsibility to apply that knowledge wisely. Part 11. George Orwell had this thought that all literature has some political connection, but not quite as people generally imagine. He didn't believe that good books should merely push certain candidates or promote specific agendas. Instead, he felt literature has a massive influence on how folks perceive life's essential issues. It molds our ideas of what's possible, what we want, and our sense of right and wrong. So, in more profound ways, every significant piece of literature is political, whether it's agreeing with or questioning the ideas behind political systems. Even if authors say they're just focused on their art, they can't completely ignore their political obligations. Orwell insisted that for literature to effectively serve a political purpose, it had to remain genuine literature. When art morphs into propaganda, it turns pretty useless because it fails both as politics and art, giving neither the justice they deserve. Quality political writing must, first and foremost, be excellent writing. It needs to have authentic characters, engaging stories, and endings that resonate deeply. People need to be drawn into a tale by its artistic value before they can engage with its political undertones. If art sacrifices its style for a political stance, it won't resonate with anyone who doesn't already agree with that viewpoint. This notion shaped the way Orwell penned his political writings. Look at Animal Farm, for instance. Its political power stems from starting out as just a simple tale about farm animals. Readers get captivated by the animal characters before realizing what they symbolize politically. By the time the political theme becomes evident, the message about the corruption of revolutions has already made an impact. This storyline and message blend is what makes it both great literature and strong political commentary. Orwell stuck to this approach with 1984 as well. That novel gives us chills about politics because it first engrosses us with Winston Smith's personal struggle to maintain his humanity in an unforgiving world. People empathize with Winston's quests for truth, love, and self-worth. His crushing defeat feels like our own tragedy, not just another bland political argument. The terror of totalitarianism hits us hard because it's presented through human stories, not just abstract theories. The political impact is more potent because it's wrapped in the story's craft. Still, Orwell realized different stories conveyed different political lessons better. Satire like Animal Farm could show the gap between political promises and realities. Books like 1984 foresaw where political trends might lead us. Nonfiction such as The Road to Wigan Pier made vague social issues real through storytelling. Essays like Politics in the English Language dissected how language could be twisted for control. Each form had unique advantages and challenges for delivering political messages. Orwell believed literature had the duty to uphold human values, especially during political unrest. When ideologies demanded total emphasis on political goals, stories could highlight personal human experiences politics claimed to support. When propaganda painted everything in black and white, literature explored the messy realities that make life meaningful. When political language became hollow and distorted, quality writing showcased truth and lucidity. This role of literature became all the more essential when totalitarian regimes in the 20th century aimed to politicize every facet of life, even thoughts and dreams. Literature has always been a refuge where personal experiences could grow without interference from oppressive regimes. It helped preserve a world where folks could love, think, and feel freely, without someone constantly peering over their shoulder. Even in the toughest political climates, literature held fast to the core values of humanity that risked fading away. But Orwell warned against mistaking literature for activism. Some intellectuals hid behind the admiration of art to avoid the uncomfortable truth about political realities. They convinced themselves that safeguarding cultural values was more important than standing up to political oppression. This was a way of shying away from reality, and ultimately, it benefited those who were content with the status quo. While literature could support resistance against political evils, it couldn't take the place of real-world activism. Writers and readers alike needed to step up as active participants in society to defend the freedom that allows great literature to blossom. Orwell also noted that literature could be used for harmful political purposes. Dictatorships produced their own artistic works, glorifying the regime and demonizing adversaries. These pieces were often well-crafted, stirring deep emotions but narrowing human insight rather than expanding it. They encouraged people to blindly follow collective authority over trusting their own judgment. They nurtured hate, fear, and blind loyalty at the expense of love, courage, and independent thought. Good literature needed to confront these tendencies by championing the values that authoritarian art tried to crush. Thus, literature's role wasn't just about inspiring, but also about resisting. On the bright side, literature should explore and celebrate the vast range of human experiences. It should help readers gain a deeper understanding of themselves and others, enhancing their empathy, imagination, and moral insight. On the other hand, literature should resist reducing human experience to political slogans. It should challenge propaganda, expose falsehoods, and protect the integrity of language. It should consistently remind us that individuals matter more than any political authority designed to control them. In fulfilling these roles, literature becomes an essential form of political engagement open to free societies. Part 12. George Orwell didn't criticize capitalism just from some classroom theory. He talked about what he actually experienced, seeing up close how capitalist systems affected real people. When he worked as a colonial policeman in Burma, he witnessed firsthand how capitalism exploited the land and the workers in those colonized areas. Later on, when he explored the lives of the working folks in northern England, he got a real feel for how tough life was for the average Joe under industrial capitalism. Orwell himself faced poverty while in Paris and London, which opened his eyes to how brutally the market systems treated people who had nothing to offer but their labor. In every situation, he saw capitalism as a game where profits always took the front seat, leaving people's well-being in the dust. Orwell was especially astounded by what he considered the crazy nature of capitalism. He noticed how it could create this weird mix of having too much of some stuff and not enough of others all at once. Factories cranked out more goods than people could buy, leaving the workers who made those things without the basics. There were vacant lands while homelessness was everywhere, and food got trashed to keep prices high, even though folks were starving. This mess wasn't a mistake. It was capitalism working as intended, prioritizing profit over people's needs. Capitalism was all about hoarding wealth, not looking after humans. Orwell also saw how capitalism warped human connections. In this system, nearly everything, labor and land included, was just a commodity up for grabs. Over time, even personal relationships got boiled down to their price tag. Success was all about how much you owned, not how much you made the world a better place. Turning human life into nothing but transactions led to psychological harm that went beyond just not having enough stuff. The rigid class divides created by capitalism really worried Orwell. He saw how it split people into strict levels based on who owned what, not on individual talent or effort. Those with money could take it easy, while those with just their work had to hustle just to keep afloat. This divide meant vastly different lives and ways of seeing the world. The folks with money often acted all superior, while the workers were usually made to feel lowly. Still, Orwell didn't deny that capitalism had its plus sides. Economies under capitalism were generally wealthier than the ones before it. It opened up more roads for personal growth and offered better protection of individual rights. It pushed innovation and efficiency in ways no other system did. More importantly, capitalism set up a base level of production that made socialism seem doable instead of just a pipe dream. Orwell also caught that not all capitalism was made the same. Different countries did the balancing act between private profit and the public good in their own unique ways. Some had strong social safety nets, powerful labor unions, and more public services. Others had democratic setups where workers had more say in economic choices. This showed that capitalism could be reined in and modified rather than totally scrapped. The big question was whether these tweaks addressed the fundamental problems or just put a Band-Aid on the worst issues. In the end, Orwell thought the problems with capitalism weren't just random bugs, they were part of its core design. As long as making money was the main driver, people's needs would always get sidelined by what the market wanted. So long as the gap between those who owned and those who worked for them stayed, class struggles would continue and could even escalate. If the people making the economic decisions are the ones who are getting richer, while the everyday folks who bear the weight of these decisions have no say, then those regular folks will never have control over their own economic lives. Trying to fix this with some minor adjustments while leaving capitalism's main workings intact is not going to solve anything. What's needed is a complete rethink of how we connect economically. But Orwell wasn't for swapping capitalism for the type of state-run socialism the Soviet Union had. He saw that as state capitalism where, instead of private owners calling the shots, it was government officials, and the workers still had no real power. So even if you change who's at the top, the class hierarchy doesn't change. In Orwell's view, socialism needed to be democratic to truly work. This meant putting economic decisions in the hands of the people affected by them. Power shouldn't be centralized. Instead, it needs to be spread out. It's also important to find a middle ground between personal freedoms and shared ownership. Orwell didn't outline a detailed roadmap for making this happen, but focused more on the fundamental ideals. He believed that every society should develop its unique version of socialism that aligns with its own history and circumstances. The heart of the matter was building economic systems aimed at human welfare, not just profit margins. It was about ensuring that workers had a voice in what they were doing and the purpose behind it. It was about creating opportunities for everyone to grow their skills and contribute to the community as a whole. Orwell understood that pushing for these changes would face resistance from those who benefited from the current system. Plus, there were practical challenges that hadn't been fully addressed by socialist theorists yet. But he saw this pursuit as essential because, honestly, the alternatives weren't any better. Capitalism was leading to mounting inequality and instability, threatening the foundations of democratic society. Meanwhile, fascism and authoritarian communism were offering false solutions that resulted in tyranny and oppression. For Orwell, democratic socialism was the only path promising both prosperity and freedom. Part 13. George Orwell had a sharp eye for the way technology wasn't just some neutral thing we use, but something that could actually shake up the power balance between everyday folks and big, powerful institutions. With each new tech invention, the scales could tip either way. It might grant us more personal freedom, or it might clamp down on us even harder. The very gadgets meant to save us from boring tasks and loneliness could also become the best spying devices ever dreamed up. The real concern wasn't so much whether we should create these new tools, but how to ensure they boost our freedom rather than take it away. In 1984, Orwell dives into this idea with his creation of the telescreen. It acts like your usual TV for news and entertainment, but also spies on you, watching for any signs of you not towing the line. The worst part? You couldn't turn it off or escape its constant watch. After a while, having this thing watching you becomes so normal that people don't even see it as a privacy invasion anymore, but just another part of daily life. It's so common that it practically fades into the background. When Orwell wrote 1984, such all-seeing technology wasn't around yet. The stuff needed to make it didn't exist, and it would have cost an arm and a leg to create. But Orwell understood that tech is always changing and getting cheaper. What seemed like wild science fiction back then could be real in no time. His goal wasn't really to guess future gadgets, but to think about the political mess that could happen when they exist. He wanted to sound the alarm on these threats long before they became unavoidable. He recognized that both dictatorships and democracies would find surveillance tech alluring. Dictators would grab it to tighten their hold and crush political opposition. Democracies might claim it's for cracking down on crime, stopping terrorism, or making government run smoother. No matter the excuse, it all pointed to the same result. Personal privacy would get squashed, making it tougher for people to be free. The trick, according to Orwell, was how slowly this happened. Not a big dramatic takeover, just a slow slide, with each new spying power explained as a sensible way to tackle real issues. People would trade small chunks of their privacy for a bit more safety or convenience, barely noticing the bigger picture until it was too late, until they woke up and saw the mountain of freedom they'd given away. By that point, the surveillance system would be so entrenched, getting rid of it would feel next to impossible. Orwell was especially freaked out by how all this watching would mess with independent thinking. When people know they're being watched, they start behaving how they think they should, even when alone. Over time, this self-censorship becomes automatic. Ideas that might stir things up get pushed aside before you even fully form them. It becomes more than just physical surveillance. It's mental restraint. The goal isn't to catch you doing something wrong, it's to make sure you don't even consider going off script. On the bright side, Orwell saw how technology could be a force for good if we approached it with the right mindset. Communication gadgets could connect people, help them trade ideas, and plan actions from far away. Information tech could democratize knowledge that was once locked away. Advances in production tech might mean less human labor to meet basic needs, freeing our time for learning, creativity, and personal development. The same tools that might shackle us in a surveillance state could just as easily swing open the doors to amazing human progress and chances. The crux of the matter depends heavily on the political and economic landscapes in which new tech emerges. Orwell believed it was crucial to keep democratic control over the advancement of technology. If major corporations driven by profit or government entities hungry for power are behind new tech, they'll likely develop and deploy these innovations to fulfill their own agendas, not necessarily for the greater good. That's why, in democratic countries, there should be frameworks that ensure tech growth involves public engagement and democratic decision-making. For this to be effective, not only does the general public need to be tech literate, but political institutions need to be equipped to manage and regulate technology effectively. Orwell understood that achieving this kind of democratic oversight on tech wouldn't be easy at all. Technology is racing forward at a rapid pace, while democratic processes are designed for thoughtful and slower decision-making. Plus, the complexity of new technologies can make it difficult for the average person to grasp the implications, which complicates their ability to contribute meaningfully to tech-related decisions. And with tech development happening globally, it's challenging for any single democracy to have a say in how technologies are crafted and utilized. These challenges suggest that tech may advance faster than democratic systems can keep up, forcing democracies to adapt to new realities rather than control them. The window for maintaining democratic oversight is closing quickly. Despite these hurdles, Orwell was sure that fighting for democratic oversight of technology is key to preserving human freedom. The alternative is to let tech grow without checks, ignoring its impact on society. That path could lead to a world where humans are subservient to machines instead of the other way around. People might become more like parts of machines than being in charge. Our capacity for independent thought and action could shrink from neglect, turning us into more efficient and predictable beings, but less human in any true sense. Orwell's main concern with technology was whether humans can remain in control of their creations. Every tech advancement increases what we can achieve, but also limits our freedoms. The challenge is to enjoy the benefits of tech progress while avoiding the downfalls of becoming too dependent on it. This means monitoring and guiding tech development in a way that aligns with human values, instead of letting those values shift according to what technology demands. The stakes are huge here. How we handle this issue could very well determine the future of our freedom. Part 14. War, Peace, and Endless Conflict. George Orwell had a remarkable insight into the nature of war, something that often escapes most people. His first-hand experiences during the Spanish Civil War, where he nearly died after being shot in the throat, deeply informed his perspective. However, beyond his personal adversity, what truly struck him was war's political and psychological impact on modern societies. To Orwell, war wasn't just a slip-up in politics. It became a crucial tool for manipulating and controlling people. In the 20th century, never-ending warfare became a strategy for organizing societies and influencing the public mindset. Once seen as the norm, peace turned into an oddity that ongoing conflict seemed to intentionally avoid. This insight is the backbone of Orwell's world in 1984. In the land of Oceania, war is never-ending, always against East Asia or Eurasia, but never both at once. The name of the enemy might change, but the state of war remains constant. People are led to believe these wars are vital for their protection, with victory just around the corner. Yet, Orwell highlights that these wars aren't meant to be won. They exist to drain society's excess resources and maintain a constant emergency, creating a facade that authoritarian rule is necessary. This endless warfare benefits the totalitarian regime in myriad ways. It justifies a vast military and security force that can also control the population. It stokes fear of outside threats, leading people to trade freedoms for perceived safety and accepting tough living conditions. It redirects frustrations towards foreign enemies, drawing attention away from domestic problems. It also prevents international alliances that could challenge the regime's grip on information and ideology. Most importantly, it sustains a perpetual state of emergency, rendering democratic processes irrelevant. Orwell saw these tactics play out in the 1930s and 40s. Nazi Germany fueled the fear of foreign threats to dismantle democracy and target minorities at home. The Soviet Union propagated the idea of capitalist dangers to justify severe policies and aggressive industrialization. Even democratic countries like Britain expanded government powers and restricted civil liberties, using wartime as a reason. Measures meant to be temporary started to permanently change the political landscape. Yet, Orwell noticed a fundamental shift in how people thought about war. Traditional wars involved nation-states fighting over tangible resources or territory, ending once goals were reached or costs rose too high. Modern ideological wars, however, based on big ideas like democracy versus fascism or socialism versus capitalism, allowed no compromise. Complete annihilation of the opposing ideology became the only acceptable outcome. Peace talks faltered as these opposing ideologies couldn't coexist. Old enemies remained enemies due to their fundamentally different core values. The world split into persistent factions, perpetually poised for a showdown that would decide the fate of humanity. Peace, no longer just an outcome, turned into a risky notion that weakened resolve. Orwell observed that endless war disrupted a society's internal dynamics. Nations continually fighting or ready to fight evolved into militarized societies where authority, order, and national sacrifice replaced personal freedoms and individual aspirations. Military mindsets and methods seeped into civilian life, changing institutions far removed from actual battlefields. Schools began resembling military training camps. Factories operated like battalions, and political parties took on military-style hierarchies. Society, swept up in this war mentality, crowded out the peaceful activities that had defined civilized life. Art, literature, philosophy, and science took on supporting roles, all redirected to meet military needs. The ongoing war was causing a huge economic hit. Resources that could have gone towards making life better were being poured into weapon production. When these weapons were used, they either took lives or became obsolete and needed replacing. Instead of creating things to help people, top scientists and engineers were dragged into military projects. Innovation started focusing on destruction rather than construction. Even though there was potential for plenty, the war-driven economy made false shortages. People were basically tricked into lowering their living standards to keep fueling the war machine. But perhaps the biggest blow came in the form of mental strain on folks. Always living under the threat of violence, they grew fearful, suspicious, and aggressive, which stained their interactions with others. The world started to be seen in terms of a simple good versus evil battle, overshadowing complex problems that required thoughtful consideration. They lost empathy for anyone branded as an enemy and couldn't engage in the clear-headed discussions and compromises that democracies thrive on. With the warlike mindset taking over, true democratic politics became nearly impossible, even if the democratic systems were still technically in place. Orwell believed breaking free from this cycle of endless conflict required a massive change in how people approached politics and international relations. They needed to let go of ideologies that split the world into opposing groups. It was important for them to see that different societies could function in their own ways without posing threats. Establishing global organizations to handle disagreements through talk instead of force was vital. Above all, they needed to value peace and human well-being more than triumphs and national pride. This change in mindset was perhaps the toughest challenge, more so than any political or economic reform could ever be. Part 15. For George Orwell, the Spanish Civil War marked a turning point in his political journey, transforming him from a passive observer into an active participant in the struggle between freedom and oppression. This chapter of his life fundamentally impacted his understanding of political movements, leaving a lasting influence on everything he wrote afterward. While in Spain, Orwell came face to face with the ugly reality that those who claimed to fight for revolutionary ideals could end up betraying them. He got a real sense of how grand political promises can starkly contrast with reality, realizing that the battle against one kind of tyranny could unknowingly pave the way for another. Orwell set off for Spain in December 1936, carrying pretty straightforward political beliefs. In his mind, fascism was the enemy, and socialism was the remedy. He viewed the Spanish Republic as a beacon of democracy and growth, while Franco's forces were the embodiment of oppression and regression. Orwell anticipated witnessing a unified left bravely opposing the forces of darkness. Instead, he found a bewildering array of factions, each one asserting that they were the true voice of the Spanish people's interest. The left was so splintered, it sometimes seemed like their infighting was more intense than their battles with the right. Orwell joined forces with the POUM, a relatively small Marxist outfit that stood against both fascism and Stalinism. Their goal was a workers' revolution, but they rejected the Communist Party's aim for tight control of the Republican cause. This position put them not only against Franco's fascists, but also at odds with the Soviet-backed communists, who were crucial allies for the Republic. At first, Orwell saw these internal disputes as just annoyances distracting from the crucial fight against fascism. He held a naive belief that people with overarching common goals could overlook tactical disagreements and work together, not grasping how deep those differences actually ran. Orwell's wake-up call came swiftly and without mercy. He saw the Communist Party systematically weaken and destroy other left-wing factions through arrests, sham trials, and even killings. They used their access to Soviet arms and supplies to assert dominance within the Republican side. Orwell witnessed their manipulation of reality, denying events that were happening right in front of him and fabricating entirely new stories. The most jarring truth he uncovered was that the communists seemed more focused on consolidating their own power than actually defeating fascism. They were willing to compromise the Republican struggle if it meant enhancing their position. From this eye-opening experience, Orwell drew several critical lessons that would inform his later political views. First, he learned that political movements are rarely as pure or unified as they appear to be. Within every movement, you'll find factions with different goals and approaches. The group that eventually takes the lead may veer far from the movement's original principles. Individuals who believe they're fighting for one cause could inadvertently find themselves advancing a completely different agenda. Starting off with noble intentions doesn't guarantee the outcome will be equally noble. Secondly, Orwell understood that the tactics used to achieve political goals can significantly impact those goals. The Communist Party insisted that their authoritarian methods were essential for unity in the fight against fascism. Yet the tactics they employed to implement this unity mirrored those used by the fascists themselves. They depended on secret police, sham trials, propaganda, and fear to maintain control. Using fascist-style methods ultimately resulted in fascist-like outcomes, despite their claim of opposing such systems. The means had twisted the ends beyond recognition. Lastly, Orwell recognized that political movements frequently attract individuals more interested in power than in the movement's declared aims. The communist leaders in Spain included those who appeared more excited about squashing rivals than defending the republic. They viewed the tumultuous revolution as a golden opportunity for personal advancement and career building. The fancy talk about liberating workers often hid nothing more than raw ambition and ruthlessness. Revolutions attracted both idealists and those with less savory intentions, and the latter had a knack for grabbing power. This wasn't a random occurrence. It was built into the nature of these movements. George Orwell saw up close how the media could be manipulated to push false narratives. All over Europe, newspapers repeated the communist version of events in Spain without bothering to verify anything. Journalists who had never been to Spain wrote as if they had a front-row view of the actions, confidently crafting stories about political changes they didn't really understand. They repeated propaganda like it was real news. What was even more disturbing was that some seemed to know they were spreading lies, but went ahead anyway because it fit their political agendas, making honest public debate impossible. On the flip side, Orwell noticed that everyday people often showed more common sense and integrity than their leaders. The Spanish workers and farmers he met were courageous and united in fighting for their own real needs. They had a clear understanding of their challenges and what might make their lives better. But over and over, they were let down by intellectuals and professional revolutionaries who claimed to support them but were focused on their own goals. The issue wasn't with the people who needed change, but with the movements that claimed to be championing that change. Revolutions starting from the ground up could be constructive, whereas those directed from the top down often caused harm. These experiences in Spain influenced everything Orwell wrote afterward. They fueled his doubt toward all political movements, even the ones he was inclined to like. They drove his belief that honesty was a fundamental political responsibility. They sharpened his concern over how language could be manipulated and facts could be twisted. They intensified his focus on power structures and how revolutionaries often ended up becoming similar to what they originally fought against. Most importantly, these lessons led him to believe that protecting individual freedom and independent thought was more important than any specific political agenda. From his time in Spain, Orwell realized that genuine political progress couldn't be hurried through revolutions or idealistic fantasies. It required careful and sustained efforts to build institutions that were resistant to corruption and protective of individual liberties. It called for constant vigilance against political movements betraying their initial principles. It required a skeptical attitude toward grand ideologies in favor of focusing on real-world outcomes. Most importantly, It needed individuals who were willing to speak the truth about what they experienced, no matter how inconvenient it was politically. Without such truth-tellers, all political movements risk becoming just new forms of oppression. Part 16. Orwell hit the nail on the head when he said that whoever controls the past controls the future, and whoever rules today controls yesterday. This idea, which pops up through a particular slogan in his book 1984, is pretty revealing when it comes to how political power operates. History isn't just a list of events. It's a mighty weapon for shaping people's identities, their sense of community, and their visions for what's coming up. If you can tweak people's memories of history, you can steer their thoughts in the present, making some futures seem absolutely out of reach. So, when you think about it, the struggle for political freedom is really about keeping history true. Orwell got this from seeing firsthand how political groups mess around with historical facts. During the Spanish Civil War, he observed communist propaganda folks spinning stories about recent battles. Stuff he'd witnessed himself was flat out denied, downplayed, or just spun into a new tale to fit the party's goals at the time. Depending on how the political situation shifted, heroes could suddenly become villains, and it didn't matter what genuinely went down. The crucial part was which story served the party's needs. It wasn't just about lying about a specific event. It was more like an organized strategy to mess with how people understand history. If the party could persuade people to accept two opposing ideas at once, the very concept of historical accuracy would fall apart. If they could make people believe the party was always right, learning anything from past mistakes was out of the question. And if the line between past and present blurred, working toward a brighter tomorrow would feel impossible. Twisting history became a way to really toy with people's minds, more than just spreading propaganda. In 1984, Orwell took this idea to the max with Winston Smith, who has to fiddle with historical records so they match the party's current needs. If the party changes allies, Winston's job is to adjust all records to reflect that the party always supported its new friends. If production numbers fall short, he fixes past forecasts to make current figures look good. If officials fall out of favor, he wipes their existence from records. The past morphs to suit the now. Nothing before the present matters on its own. Orwell realized that this manipulation wasn't only happening in dictatorships. All sorts of governments and political groups rewrite history to defend their current stance and polish their image. Even democracies aren't immune to making their past look better, highlighting victories and covering up flaws. The difference is in the degree, not the act itself. In totalitarian regimes, control of history is total, while in democracies, it's more about influence. But the core pattern remains similar across the board. The real risk with messing with history is that most people don't have personal experience of past events. They count on documents, records, and other folks' stories. If these are tampered with, people have no way to figure out what actually happened. They depend on authorities as the keepers of their own history, leaving them vulnerable to manipulation beyond just political opinions. It's a whole thing that changes how they grasp what's possible, normal, and worth aiming for. Orwell noticed this happening not just with big groups, but with individuals too. People often adjust their memories to fit who they are today and what they believe now. They recall supporting policies they argued against before and forget backing things they currently oppose. People often like to make their past sound better, covering up mistakes along the way. This tendency leaves us unable to recognize how we manipulate our own stories. We crave narratives about our past that boost our self-image today. On a broader level, countries do the same with their own histories, but it's a much bigger deal for them. They often teach a shiny version of their past, spotlighting heroic moments while sweeping the awkward parts under the rug. By doing so, they create myths that support the current power setup, concealing the messy truths about how things really happened. These tales turn complex historical figures into simple heroes, backing the politics of the present. While such mythologized history can boost national pride and political motivation, it creates problems because it stops countries from learning from their real past slip-ups, repeating mistakes while acting like they never happened. That's why it's crucial to keep history honest. It takes courage to remember and record actual events, especially when it's risky or goes against the current agenda. We need systems that protect historians, journalists, and others who document our history. Schools should teach students to think critically about historical sources, and laws and culture should ensure archives and documents are preserved. More importantly, we need folks who care about truth over ease, willing to stand up for what's right even when it's unpopular. Orwell understood that history could never be totally unbiased or free from political angles. Each history book comes from a particular perspective with specific aims. The choices about what makes it into history books and how those stories get told are influenced by the author's beliefs and values. So, trying to achieve perfect objectivity might be both unrealistic and unhelpful. What we need is a range of perspectives to prevent any one story from ruling the narrative. A diversity of historical viewpoints acts as a shield against those who might want to distort history for personal gain. Orwell believed that keeping personal memories alive was an essential form of political defiance. In his book 1984, when Winston insists that 2 + 2 = 4, it's about more than just math. It symbolizes his grasp on reality, untouched by the party's influence. His memories of the past, even if a bit unclear, challenge the official narrative championed by those in power. Holding on to personal memories becomes an act of rebellion, requiring neither a group, money, nor permission. It's the most basic and necessarily crucial form of resistance for people living under harsh rule. Chapter 17. Learning, Knowledge, and Shaping Minds. George Orwell really believed that education was the strongest tool to either lift people up or hold them down in any society. The way communities mold young minds is crucial in determining the adults they'll grow into and the kind of world they'll help create. Education can foster independent thinking, encourage critical examination, and guide moral decision-making, all crucial for a thriving democracy. On the flip side, it might also encourage conformity, discourage questioning, and make people easy to manipulate. The fine line between teaching and indoctrinating leads to vastly different outcomes. Societies that don't educate properly risk their freedom, no matter their political systems. Orwell's experience at Eton College offered him a glimpse into how elite schools shape future leaders. Eton prioritized tradition, rituals, and social hierarchies over academics, teaching students to see themselves as naturally entitled to lead. Students learned how to secure obedience without questioning the rightness or fairness of their commands, picking up a leader's mindset long before they had the maturity or knowledge for it. This imbalance of confidence and competence became a major issue for Britain and its empire. Orwell was also quite critical of how working-class children were educated. Their schools were more focused on creating docile workers than independent thinkers. Lessons emphasized rote memorization instead of analysis, uniformity over creativity, and compliance over curiosity. Students followed orders without understanding the why and rarely thought about broader issues. This approach trained them to accept rather than contribute to decision-making, making them skilled yet politically passive. What's taught in schools was as important as how it's taught. Lessons in subjects like history, literature, science, and politics shape how students perceive the world and what they think is possible. If education depicted the current social order as unchangeable, students wouldn't envision alternatives. If it described human nature as inherently selfish, they'd doubt cooperation and altruism. If it offered simple solutions to complex problems, students could easily fall for leaders promising quick and easy fixes. The curriculum often served as a medium for subtle political influence. Orwell observed how oppressive regimes manipulated education to produce citizens that suited their needs. In Nazi Germany, schools were overhauled to teach racial superiority, strict discipline, and absolute loyalty to the state. Students were taught to value group identity over individual thoughts and prioritize national interests over personal ones. Critical thinking was discouraged and seen as betrayal. Challenging authority was considered a weakness. Education became a means to create loyal followers who wouldn't question orders on a moral or intellectual level. Similar patterns were visible in the Soviet Union and other authoritarian regimes. But democratic societies have their own education challenges. Democracies depend on citizens who can thoughtfully consider complex political issues and make informed decisions about policy proposals. Providing this kind of education is much harder than the simplistic indoctrination of authoritarian regimes. It requires teachers who can think independently and inspire questioning, even if it goes against their own beliefs. It demands schools to be protected from political meddling and commercial pressures. To truly appreciate independent thinking over following the crowd, it's key to foster a community that values freedom of thought. George Orwell was big on teaching children to think for themselves. He wanted them to learn how to find solid evidence, identify faulty reasoning, and see through misleading propaganda. He stressed that kids should understand how language can manipulate thought and how statistics can sometimes be used to support shaky arguments. He encouraged a spirit of questioning norm opinions and authority. Plus, he believed that if they came across new information that conflicted with their old beliefs, they should be ready to shift their perspective without much fuss. This flexibility of mind was essential not just for personal development, but for societal progress. However, Orwell's vision went beyond just enhancing intellect. He believed education should also touch on moral development. Children needed to understand empathy, practice kindness, and care about the well-being of others. They had to learn that their actions had impacts beyond personal benefits. They also needed the courage to stand by what's right, even when it meant facing challenges or taking risks. Intelligence by itself wasn't enough. Without a moral foundation, you could end up with clever but indifferent individuals. The aim was to mold fully rounded people, not just logical thinkers. Orwell saw literature and the arts as vital components of education. These areas opened students' minds to the richness of human experience and helped nurture their creative and emotional faculties. Books offered them a window into diverse perspectives and feelings, expanding their understanding of humanity. Through art, they learned to appreciate beauty and unlock their own creativity. Even if some dismissed these subjects as non-essential, Orwell believed they were crucial for developing well-rounded individuals. A society that sidelined the arts for technical know-how alone could end up with efficient but emotionally detached citizens. He understood that overhauling the education system wouldn't be easy because existing structures often serve those already benefiting from them. Elite schools might be reluctant to change if it meant losing the advantages their students enjoyed. Schools in less affluent areas could resist shifts that empower students to question the status quo. Politicians might not want a population that thinks independently, and business leaders might oppose changes that lead to less docile employees and consumers. The task was to challenge these influential groups, steadfastly guarding what's familiar. Yet, Orwell believed such reform was necessary for constructing a genuinely democratic society. Education was too important to be left solely in educators' hands. Everyone needed to pitch in: parents, communities, and the democratic system at large. Schools had to stay vigilant, ensuring classes weren't unduly influenced by political or commercial pressures. Most importantly, every child, regardless of background, deserved access to education that allowed them to fully realize their potential as human beings. Doing so wasn't just a moral imperative, it was crucial for ensuring society remained both free and prosperous. Part 18. George Orwell had a pretty insightful perspective on human nature. He wasn't all sunshine and rainbows, but he wasn't a total downer either. He believed people could do amazing or awful things, and sometimes both came from the same individual. What nudged someone down one path or the other wasn't something unchangeable within them. It was the social, political, and economic environments they lived in. Change those surroundings, and people's actions might change too. This was central to Orwell's political beliefs. It meant you didn't need to change the core of human nature to see real change. How folks behaved depended on the systems and incentives shaping their day-to-day experiences. Orwell's understanding of human behavior came from witnessing people in tough spots himself. As a colonial policeman in Burma, he saw how the whole imperial setup messed with everyone involved. While diving into poverty across Paris, London, and northern England, he observed how being poor could mess with moral behavior. And during the Spanish Civil War, he witnessed how political turmoil could bring out both the bravest and the cruelest in people. These experiences convinced him that people's actions were way more flexible and shaped by their environment than most political thinkers gave credit for. Folks weren't naturally good or bad. They adapted to whatever situation they found themselves in. This thinking explained why institutions were such a big deal for Orwell. Places that promoted teamwork and honesty would foster those values in people. But in settings that encouraged competition and selfishness, you wouldn't see anyone's best side. The same person might be generous in one place and cruel in another. Therefore, changing society should focus on fixing the systems rather than individual people. Create the right conditions, and better behavior would just follow naturally. Yet, Orwell also understood that certain traits in human psychology were universal and had to be considered by any realistic political plan. People seemed to want status and recognition, which could be channeled into good or bad outcomes. They formed groups that built internal cohesion, but could also lead to external conflict. Many were prone to self-deception, clinging to comfortable beliefs despite clear evidence to the contrary. Plus, they sought purpose, which could be fulfilled through noble aims or destructive obsessions. These weren't necessarily problems to solve, but aspects to manage wisely. Orwell was particularly focused on the thirst for power within human psychology. Some individuals seemed driven by an endless desire to control others, not just for achieving goals like wealth or security, but as a goal in itself. These types gravitated toward political arenas and institutions that gave them a platform to exert influence. They excelled at using grand language to cloak their true pursuit of power. You'd find such power-hungry folks across the political spectrum, from fascists to communists to Democrats. These individuals brought a major risk to political movements. They could derail noble intentions with agendas centered on self-interest. People might join movements to fight injustice only to find themselves serving leaders focused on their own gain. Revolutions aiming for liberation could morph into new forms of oppression. Democratic institutions designed to serve the common good might get hijacked by special interests looking out just for themselves. The way to combat corruption is to stay vigilant and have checks in place to stop any person or group from getting too dominant. Thanks to human nature, we've got the potential for both freedom and oppression, and it hinges on how we design our institutions. Orwell had a keen interest in why people so often surrender intellectually and morally. He noticed that many folks preferred being told what to think rather than wrestling through it themselves. Going your own route can be tough and lonely, while following the crowd gives you that snug feeling of belonging. This tendency makes people easy pickings for charismatic leaders and authoritarian movements. They're quick to trade their judgment for the comfort of letting someone else set their beliefs and values. Most of the time, no one's making them do it. They often do it willingly, sometimes even eagerly. Totalitarian ideologies are quite tempting because they offer folks the comfort of clear beliefs and a moral compass. They provide simple fixes for complex problems and offer guidance for those who feel lost. They promise to ease the stress of making moral and political choices on your own. You get a sense of purpose that might feel lacking in more open societies. But here's the catch. You give up your personal freedom for this sense of comfort, and a lot of folks are willing to make that trade-off. They choose the certainty of being controlled over the challenge of being free. Yet, Orwell recognized that people could be incredibly brave and staunchly independent when it really counted. Ordinary individuals had the strength to stand up under extreme pressure if they believed deeply in something. They could cling to their values even when faced with terrible things like torture or even death. They had the ability to stay sharp and make smart choices even when things were in utter chaos. The same person could be courageous or a coward, all depending on the circumstances and their moral upbringing and education. Orwell's deep understanding of human behavior led him to reject both overly sunny and overly gloomy political theories. Dreamy ideas that counted on people being naturally selfless weren't going to work because they ignored how self-seeking and power-hungry people can naturally be. On the flip side, accepting injustice as just the way it is wasn't right either, because it missed out on people's potential for moral growth and teamwork. Realistic political plans should deal with people as they really are, not as we imagine them to be. These strategies should aim to channel selfish drives for the common good while also encouraging selfless actions. The aim isn't to make human nature perfect, but to shape an environment where the best aspects of human nature have a better shot at thriving. Part 19. George Orwell, even though he didn't have much time for organized religion, really understood how people have this deep need for a sense of purpose and meaning in life, something that religion traditionally provided. He wasn't into supernatural beliefs, but he got that logic and reason alone just didn't cut it for most folks. People craved beliefs that went beyond just what they wanted right at that moment. They wanted to care about others and chase after goals that would last long after they were gone. As folks started stepping away from religious faith, it left this big empty space that politics and ideologies quickly tried to fill. Orwell saw this situation as a bit of a double-edged sword. It had potential, but it was also a bit of a ticking time bomb for humanity. Orwell's own break away from religion didn't happen overnight. Growing up in a Christian middle-class family in England, his experiences in places like Burma, where he saw real poverty, made him start questioning the whole kind and benevolent God thing. How could a just God allow so much unfairness? And if the church was really about helping people, why did it often side with the powerful instead of the helpless? These questions pushed him toward a humanist outlook, one that focused more on human well-being rather than divine laws. To him, people have value simply because they're human beings, not because they were supposedly made in God's image or had promises of an afterlife. Switching from religious beliefs to secular ones might have sorted out some problems, but it sure stirred up new ones too. Religion, with all its flaws, still offered people a core sense of importance and a bigger purpose. It promoted moral actions even when they weren't in one's personal interest, and provided comfort and hope during tough times. While secular humanism could logically argue the case for morality, it kind of fell short when it came to providing that emotional comfort and security people got from religion. A lot of people, even those leading comfortable and free lives, found themselves feeling a bit hollow without that spiritual meaning. This emptiness made them easy targets for political ideologies promising to give back that lost sense of belonging and purpose. Fascism and communism stepped in like secular religions, offering their followers a grand sense of purpose and historical mission, claiming that personal sacrifices would help achieve ultimate goals, whether it was racial purity or a classless society. They crafted their own rituals and symbols to answer the human need for transcendence, building communities not unlike religious ones. For many, these political faiths filled the void left by the decline of traditional religions. But Orwell saw these as even more dangerous than traditional religions because they zeroed in on the here and now. Religious leaders could only offer heavenly rewards, while political leaders claimed their failures were just minor setbacks on the road to an earthly paradise. This kind of thinking allowed them to demand endless sacrifices for goals that remained perpetually out of reach, leading to fanaticism and cruelty that surpassed even the worst religious conflicts. These political faiths mixed the irrational side of belief with real-world agendas. Orwell thought that societies needed to find ways of making life meaningful and purposeful, without veering into totalitarianism or falling back on supernatural beliefs. The idea was to develop a form of secular spirituality that could fulfill our craving for something greater while still holding on to truth and freedom. Art, literature, music, and philosophy could bring beauty and meaning into life, enriching it without asking people to believe in things that just weren't true. Science, with all its discoveries, could keep our curiosity about the universe alive. Getting involved in democratic processes could give people the feeling that they're making a difference and doing something meaningful. Building relationships with others could offer the kind of connections that really matter on a personal level. The challenge is to find meaning that's rooted in reality and doesn't require ignoring the facts or suppressing critical thought. Traditional faiths often asked people to believe things that didn't line up with observable truth, and political ideologies might demand blind loyalty even when things go south. Secular humanism, however, proposes that we find our purpose in values that hold up when you test them against logic and real-world experiences. Compassion makes sense because suffering and hardship are undeniably real. Seeking truth is essential because seeing the world more clearly makes life better for everyone. Creating beauty has its own value because it can elevate the human spirit. These ideals stand on their own and don't need any supernatural justification because their benefits are clear as day. Orwell understood that realizing life doesn't last forever gives it a special kick, a vibe you won't get from living forever. Knowing our time is limited makes each moment stand out, pushing us to figure out what really matters. Death is the great equalizer, taking something gloomy and turning it into a reminder of the importance of our decisions. While forever can seem appealing, being aware that life is short gives it more substance. If this is our one shot at life, then improving it here and now is essential, not something to be put off by bigger picture ideals. It's crucial to actively work on minimizing suffering because there's no afterlife to even things out. Justice isn't something that can wait, since there's no cosmic scale to balance the odds. Each generation has to roll up its sleeves to make the world better, as there's no magical fix coming from the outside. In many ways, secular humanism requires us to focus more on human well-being than on religious promises of future salvation. However, Orwell also noted that finding meaning without religion can be fragile and wobbly, easily shaken when times get tough. This kind of meaning leans heavily on society and culture, which can be easily threatened by political or economic turmoil. It lacks the comforting certainty that good will inevitably conquer evil, a belief that faith often provides. People in secular settings have to figure out how to deal with life's uncertainties, something believers might navigate through their faith. This challenge is part of what gives a humanistic perspective its nobility. For societies that take a secular approach, the big challenge is nurturing cultures that create meaning and purpose without falling back on illusions or rigid beliefs. This means staying open to different ways to find purpose while holding on to shared values like truth, freedom, and respect for human dignity. It means building systems that protect individual freedoms while promoting community engagement. Education should not only teach critical thinking, but also develop a solid moral foundation. Most importantly, it takes people who can find joy in everyday life without needing cosmic validation or a promise of eternity. This could be the most daunting task for today's societies, but it's also one of the most vital ones. Part 20. George Orwell picked up on how crucial the 20th century was for humanity. For the first time, technology was speeding past our ability to handle it wisely. New ways to chat, travel, produce things, and fight wars were both freeing and threatening. Stuff our ancestors couldn't even imagine. The very inventions that could wipe out poverty and unite us worldwide also had the power to snoop on people and control them, making old tyrannies look like a walk in the park. Whether technology would help or hurt freedom really depended on democracies getting a handle on it before it spiraled out of control. That's what modern life was up against. In Orwell's era, you could see this tech start to shift things. Radio and movies gave us new ways to broadcast messages to the masses all at once. Planes and new machines were redoing how wars were fought. Mass production was churning out stuff like never before, reshaping how societies got organized. Each tech upgrade was tilting the power scales between regular folks and big players, giving politics a good shake-up. Some tech seemed fine or even good initially, but turned out to have some mighty oppressive elements when fully unleashed. Orwell's big take on the tech politics debate was that if we didn't consciously lean away from this, tech would likely get used for political control. Just because free countries dreamed up these technologies didn't mean they'd naturally serve freedom. They'd be shaped to fit the agenda of whoever was running the show. In dictatorships, tech would tighten their grip. In democracies, things weren't so clear-cut, though equally important. Keeping tech in tune with democracy required a lot of effort and a hands-on approach to make sure tech moved in a good direction. Navigating the tech and freedom dance wasn't easy because tech progress brought real perks, but also new dangers. Mass communication could pump propaganda and spy on us, but it could also boost learning and democracy. New ways to get around the world could help invade or control, but they could also drive trade and cultural exchange. Production breakthroughs could cause dependency and wreck the environment, but they could also kill off scarcity and make work less of a grind. The good or bad of these tools rested on who was using them. Orwell saw that future conflicts would center more on who controlled information, not territory or resources. Whoever laid down the narrative controlled reality. That turned mass communication tools into power punches, sometimes packing more punch than armies. A government that could censor all the info could steer public opinion so far that opposing them would seem like a fantasy. People could end up backing policies that hurt them, all because they didn't get the full picture. Democracy could morph into just a cover for a dictatorship fueled by information. But Orwell thought there was still hope. These info technologies might work for democracy if they supported open idea exchange. Different news voices could combat propaganda and lies. Technologies that let people talk back could pull everyday citizens into political chats, not just leave them absorbing whatever leaders put out there. In our world today, communication networks are so sprawling that governments struggle to completely control how info flows within their borders. While these technologies could ramp up control and oppression like never before, they also open up avenues for more democratic involvement. The final impact really comes down to how these technologies get built and plugged into current systems. Orwell worried a lot about how tech advancements would shape people's minds. As life got more chaotic and things moved faster, folks found it tough to concentrate on the big-ticket items. The never-ending rush of info and noise was drowning out people's ability to think deeply and calmly. This constant barrage was eroding their knack for zeroing in on one task or chasing long-haul goals that demand steady dedication. People started depending more on tech to do stuff they once handled themselves. People's reliance on technology made it easier to sway them and less inclined to think for themselves. Moreover, the rapid changes in technology were spurring social and cultural shifts, leaving folks feeling uneasy about the future and nostalgic for a past that might not have ever really been. Traditional ways of living were crumbling quicker than anyone could establish and grasp new ones, making people feel adrift and more receptive to authoritarian ideas that promised to restore order and meaning. The benefits of modern technology weren't reaching everyone equally, creating new kinds of inequality while some enjoyed newfound prosperity. Those who struggled to keep up with tech advancements found themselves falling behind both economically and socially. These upheavals stirred political instability, threatening democratic structures. Orwell believed that managing technological change while preserving human freedom required novel forms of democratic participation and oversight. He argued that it wasn't enough to leave decisions solely to tech experts, as their choices were deeply impactful both politically and socially. It's crucial for people to understand enough about technology to partake in conversations on its direction and use. Democracies needed to devise fresh methods to govern technological advances, ensuring they served the public's interests over private profits. International cooperation was also essential to address tech challenges that crossed borders. Most importantly, society had to cultivate strong values and principles to steer technological choices, rather than just chasing new tech for the sake of novelty. Orwell's pressing question about technology in modern life was whether people could stay in control of their own creations. Each technological breakthrough brought new capabilities that reshaped life in unexpected ways. The cumulative impact might alter human nature itself in ways current generations can't foresee or handle. Future humans could become as different from us as we are from those who lived before the age of technology. Whether this transformation would lead to progress or decline hinged on whether it strengthened or undermined the aspects that give life value. Safeguarding human liberty, dignity, and moral responsibility in this tech-fueled era would require wisdom, courage, and constant vigilance from every generation. Part 21. George Orwell clearly understood how a society's organization of work shapes not just its economy, but also the character and value of its people. Most of us spend our days working, and those hours heavily influence our relationships, sense of purpose, and self-esteem. When the work system treats people like machines or replaceable items, it dulls their ability to think for themselves and act ethically. On the contrary, when jobs respect human dignity and foster personal growth, work becomes satisfying and fosters community bonds. Transforming work conditions was essential for any true social reform. Orwell's perspective on work was deeply shaped by his own hands-on experience with manual labor while investigating poverty in Paris and London. He worked as a dishwasher in fancy restaurants, witnessing the underlying mechanisms that supported a comfortable middle-class life. He observed how workers were treated by bosses and customers and experienced firsthand the exhaustion, stress, and humiliation of jobs that lacked stability, respect, or upward mobility. He also saw how financial necessity forced people to endure degrading work environments, stripping away their basic human dignity. Poverty wasn't simply missing money, it meant losing freedom and self-worth just to survive. What Orwell found particularly troubling about the capitalist work model was how it separated workers from the outcomes of their efforts. Factory and kitchen workers would do repetitive tasks without understanding or influencing the larger purpose of their work. They became mere parts of machines they neither owned nor controlled. This separation left them disconnected from their own skills, making their work feel pointless even when it met societal needs. They missed out on the satisfaction of creating something valuable or beautiful. Earning money became the all-consuming goal, eclipsing the idea of contributing to society's welfare. The division of labor, while boosting industrial productivity, created rigid class distinctions based on different life experiences. People in intellectual roles often looked down on manual workers, bosses dismissed laborers, and policymakers ignored those who executed their plans. These divides built barriers in understanding, making it harder for people to recognize their common humanity. Compassion and appreciation for those in different job sectors faded. Yet, Orwell observed that even in harsh working environments, people maintained their dignity and creativity. The dishwashers and coal miners he encountered formed informal support systems and resistance networks, maintaining their humanity. They took pride in their work, even if society undervalued it, and created communities that provided meaning beyond just making a living. They demonstrated that even oppressive economic systems couldn't fully erase human dignity. This tenacity gave Orwell hope that improving work environments could unlock hidden human potential. Orwell saw democratic socialism as a way to overhaul work relationships, prioritizing human dignity and development. Workers should have control over their work environments and a voice in production decisions. They needed to see how their individual roles contributed to larger social goals and have opportunities for learning and growth, reaching their full potential. Most importantly, they should be acknowledged as human beings, not merely components of a production line. Work should foster human development rather than stifle it in pursuit of output. This shift required more than changing ownership. It called for rethinking the purpose behind economic endeavors. Rather than just trying to maximize profits for shareholders, society should focus on organizing production in a way that improves everyone's life. Instead of placing efficiency above everything else, we should pair it with values like imagination, safety, and community spirit. Instead of accepting inequality as an inevitable outcome of market forces, we should work to ensure that everyone can find meaningful work and enjoy a good quality of life. To achieve this, we'd need to adjust both our systems and our cultural outlook. Orwell understood that technology could either make working more enjoyable or dehumanize it, depending entirely on how we chose to advance and use it. Machines have the potential to relieve us from risky and dull jobs, allowing more room for creative and satisfying activities. However, they could also be used to keep workers under tighter surveillance and control than ever before. The key is to guide technological advancement so it serves human needs rather than reshaping those needs to suit technology. This requires decisions about technology not to be left just to experts or private companies, but to involve the public in a democratic way. Workers deserve a voice in deciding how technology will be integrated into their jobs. The goal should be to create a society where everyone can contribute their skills and effort for a shared benefit, while also realizing their individual potential. Work should be more than just something we have to do to survive. It should offer fulfillment and strengthen social bonds. This doesn't mean every job will always be easy or enjoyable, but it does mean recognizing the importance of all work and treating every worker with dignity. The respect given to work should reflect the dignity of the people doing it. This change isn't just a smart economic goal. It's a moral requirement for any society that claims to value human equality and freedom. Without such reforms, democracy wouldn't feel complete, and true social justice would remain just out of reach. Part 22. The Intellectual versus the Everyman. George Orwell often explored the tricky relationship between intellectuals and everyday people in modern democracies. Even though he was part of the intellectual crowd, he was wary of their arrogance, their tendency to get lost in theory, and their disconnect from the daily lives of ordinary folks. Yet, Orwell recognized that intellectuals had unique and essential responsibilities. They needed to preserve cultural heritage, speak up against power misuse, and defend the truth in societies constantly bombarded by propaganda and deceit. The real puzzle was how intellectuals could do these critical jobs without losing touch with the very people they aimed to assist. This required a fresh way of seeing their role in society. Orwell didn't hold back when critiquing intellectuals, as he often saw them living in a sort of bubble, disconnected from the real-world impact of their ideas. For instance, academics might endorse wild economic theories without having to face the real consequences. Literary critics might praise niche art movements that don't resonate with what average folks want or need. Political thinkers could craft complicated theories without considering how they'd actually work out in practice. This distance made intellectuals risky. They viewed people more as tools for their abstract goals, rather than as individuals with inherent value. They often overlooked the very human purposes that should be at the heart of their work. The problem was compounded by the fact that intellectuals often created their own language and problems that made little sense outside their circles. Academic fields developed convoluted jargon that obscured rather than illuminated big ideas. Debates centered on topics that only mattered to fellow intellectuals, instead of tackling real issues impacting everyday life. Instead of offering clear moral guidance, intellectuals leaned towards intricate theoretical arguments. This specialization might have presented their expertise as crucial, but it also disconnected them from the public they were supposed to enlighten. They ended up forming a distinct group with their own priorities and alliances. Orwell was especially critical of those intellectuals who aligned politically based on abstract theories rather than tangible outcomes. He noted how some Western thinkers supported Stalin's regime because it sounded theoretically right for socialism, completely ignoring the oppressive reality. Similarly, he saw conservative intellectuals defending colonial policies due to theoretical ideas about progress, despite the immense harm those policies inflicted. In both cases, these thinkers prioritized their theories over the people suffering the consequences. They lost sight of the fact that political theories should aim to improve human welfare, not become goals that justify any means to achieve them. This confusion not only muddled thinking, but was a moral pitfall as well. However, Orwell didn't write off thinkers entirely. He believed they were indispensable in specific roles. They were the guardians of cultural narratives that gave meaning and continuity civilization. They exposed lies and falsehoods perpetrated by those in power. They educated, helping people understand complex ideas and develop critical thinking skills. They were the creators, the writers and artists, who captured the essence of human existence. Without strong intellectuals, society's capacity to reflect and reform would diminish. The challenge for thinkers was to perform these roles in a way that genuinely served everyday people, not just their intellectual peers. This meant breaking down ideas in a way anyone could grasp, not just for experts. It meant focusing on issues relevant to daily life rather than just feeding the academic system. So, instead of diving deeper into complicated theories, they had to roll up their sleeves and see how their ideas held up in real life. It was all about keeping their feet on the ground and realizing they didn't have all the answers and might mess up sometimes. Smarts should make you wise about the chaos of human problems, not arrogant enough to think you can solve everything. Orwell believed that those who loved their books could learn a lot from everyday folks if they just listened with humility and respect. Often, good old-fashioned common sense gave better guidance than flashy theories when it came to the hustle and bustle of living and working together. Regular people who dealt directly with economic and social challenges often saw things that those stuck in ivory towers couldn't spot. Ordinary folks usually valued and prioritized things in ways that made more sense than the grand theories some experts came up with. If intellectuals ignored or dismissed the voices of the average person, they'd miss out on important truths and insights. Plus, their lofty ideas wouldn't make a real difference in the world. But Orwell also realized that everyday people could benefit a ton from the expertise and views that intellectuals brought to the table. In our complex modern world, sheer common sense isn't always enough to solve problems. To understand things like economics, politics, science, and culture, you need some know-how that most folks don't have the time to explore deeply. Intellectuals could be the helpful guides showing people the big forces and trends affecting their lives, which aren't always clear at first glance. The relationship between brainiacs and regular folks shouldn't be about looking down at each other. It should be about mutual respect and learning together. Both camps have something important to offer in the quest to make a better world. For this relationship to thrive, intellectuals need to drop the superior attitude while everyday people should get more chances to learn and embrace culture. Those with book smarts need to remember that knowing things is a privilege that carries responsibilities, not just something to brag about. Common folks should also have the opportunity to grow intellectually, rather than just taking the expert's word as gospel. Education should be accessible to everyone, no matter their background, and cultural centers should welcome the general population, not just the elite. The aim is to tear down the imaginary barriers between thinkers and ordinary people, while holding on to the true benefits that intellectual pursuits can offer to society as a whole. Part 23. Art, Beauty, and Defending Our Society. George Orwell pointed out that art and beauty aren't just extras for societies that have everything else figured out. They're actually crucial to human life, giving depth and value to everything we do. If a society only cares about practical stuff and ignores art, it might get rich, but lose its essence. Similarly, if art doesn't engage with the world, it misses the opportunity to connect with people fighting for justice and freedom. The challenge is creating art that's both beautiful and meaningful. To pull that off, you've got to get rid of the idea that beauty and truth, or art and politics, can't mix. Orwell's own writings prove that being politically aware can actually enhance art, not the other way around. In Animal Farm, the political message hits hard because it starts as a compelling story with relatable characters. 1984 makes the horrors of dictatorship real by turning big political ideas into personal human struggles. Even his essays on language and politics were impactful because they were written clearly and cleverly. In every instance, the political impact was stronger because the art itself was exceptional. Good politics and good art go hand in hand, demanding honesty about what's happening in the world. However, Orwell warned that dictatorships were a major threat to artistic freedom and creativity. They wanted all cultural expressions to promote their agenda, turning art into propaganda and literature into mind control. Beauty was defined by the ruler's needs. Artists were pressured to produce work that glorified the regime and attacked its enemies. Thinking for oneself was considered a crime against the state. This not only made for bad politics, but also resulted in terrible art, failing on both artistic and moral grounds. Orwell saw this firsthand in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, where talented artists were forced to create work that went against their beliefs. Some fled to places where they could continue being creative freely. Others tried to sneak their true messages in, and some just gave in, becoming mouthpieces for the state. In every case, when art had to align with political agendas, both the art and the politics suffered. Societies that can't handle independent thought in art eventually lose the ability for independent thought in other areas too. That's why Orwell argued that artistic freedom is vital for political freedom. Art allows people to dream and see the world in ways not shaped by societal pressure. It preserves ways of understanding and feeling that might otherwise be crushed by strong political and social forces. It gives us experiences of beauty and meaning beyond the daily political battles. Most importantly, it shows that humans can create purely for the joy of creation, not just for practical purposes. This kind of creativity is something machines can't do, and it's a big part of why being human is so special. But Orwell also cautioned against believing art could be fully detached from moral or political issues. Artists who think they're above politics might unknowingly be supporting the powerful. Art that ignores injustice and suffering becomes part of the problem. Beauty that ignores human pain isn't real beauty. It's morally flawed. True artistic honesty involves confronting all aspects of human experience, including the difficult and unpleasant ones. Artists have a responsibility to reflect the truth of their time, no matter how tough that might be. The aim is to create art that's true to itself while also serving a greater good. To make art that speaks truth instead of promoting propaganda, we need artists committed to capturing human complexity, rather than sticking to simple ideological views. This means reaching audiences willing to engage with tough and provocative artistic visions, not just those seeking comfort and reassurance. It also requires cultural institutions that support artistic freedom while encouraging social responsibility. Most importantly, societies must value both beauty and justice, understanding that one can't exist without the other. Art and morality aren't enemies. They're two sides of the same coin, essential for human flourishing. George Orwell believed that truly engaging with art can touch people's hearts in a way that simply learning about ethics can't. He thought that books allow readers to step into the lives of people completely different from themselves, helping them feel empathy. Paintings and sculptures can reveal beauty in parts of life often overlooked. Music stirs emotions that expand our range to feel and express ourselves deeply. These art experiences aren't supposed to take the place of moral thinking. They're the foundation that moral reasoning builds itself upon. Someone who's never seen beauty might not understand why it's important to protect and preserve it. That's why Orwell pushed for everyone to have a chance to experience art, not just those with the money or free time. Art and culture shouldn't be a luxury for a select group. Everyone should be able to access it. Public efforts should focus on promoting art that benefits the whole community, not just catering to specific private likes. Schools should include art and culture in their teachings along with practical skills, helping people both appreciate beauty and learn practical skills. The goal wasn't to make an artist out of everyone, but to let everyone enjoy and understand humanity's creative achievements. Orwell's idea was all about creating societies that respect personal dignity and encourage people to grow. Yet he knew real art doesn't come from bureaucratic decisions or assembly lines. Art requires unique vision and the artist's freedom to explore new ideas and create without needing immediate results. When societies try to control art too much, they turn it into propaganda rather than genuine creativity. The best way to promote great art is to give artists the freedom to create and ensure their work reaches people who will appreciate and gain from it. Balancing artistic freedom with social responsibility, personal expression with community welfare, is tough but necessary. This delicate and constantly shifting balance is vital to both art excellence and the progress of human society. Part 24. All right, so George Orwell was around during a time when democratic governments were really feeling the heat. Folks on the fascist and communist sides claimed they had better, more effective ideas for how a government should operate. Orwell watched as democratic governments in Europe fell apart, unable to cope with financial problems, social conflicts, and military dangers. But instead of losing faith in democracy itself, Orwell thought the real problem was in how it was being practiced. He was convinced that democracy could not only stick around, but actually flourish if it were revamped to meet the challenges of the day. This overhaul would require changes both in institutions and in culture so that participating in democracy actually meant something. He believed that the future of human freedom depended on getting these changes right. Orwell's big critique of existing democratic systems was that they didn't really allow for true, equal involvement. While people technically had political rights, these were tough to put into action due to vast economic disparities. The rich could easily sway political power by funding campaigns, lobbying, or owning media outlets, while regular people struggled to get their voices heard. Schools seemed to turn out graduates who were good at following orders rather than thinking critically about political issues. And let's not forget how powerful entities steered the information flow to suit their agendas, not the public's interests. In Orwell's eyes, democracy was being used as a front for rule by the few who had money and influence. To fix these issues, Orwell believed that democracy needed to grow beyond just the political sphere and into the economic one. If people didn't have a say in their jobs or financial well-being, participating equally in political decisions was nearly impossible. The pressure of depending on powerful employers and making ends meet kept people from taking the political risks they needed to. So, for Orwell, economic democracy wasn't just nice to have, it was crucial for real political democracy. This meant that reforms needed to address topics like who owns and controls resources and how they're spread around. True political equality couldn't happen without economic equality in a properly democratic society. Orwell also saw new challenges for democracy cropping up as the 20th century moved along. Modern communities were so large and complicated that it wasn't practical for everyone to have a direct say in every decision. While representative institutions were essential, they had their own set of problems like keeping politicians accountable and genuinely reflective of the people's needs and concerns. Career politicians occasionally became out of touch with voters, and bureaucracies grew more powerful, resisting oversight from the public. The fast pace of technological and societal changes made it difficult for democratic structures to pivot quickly enough to address emerging issues. Furthermore, mass communication tools like radio, movies, and later TV started shaping public opinion in ways never seen before. Those in charge of these platforms wielded immense power in setting political agendas. Politicians often used clever advertising tactics to promote policies favoring the elite while pretending to fulfill public desires. The distinction between genuine information and manipulation became blurry, especially as political messaging adopted marketing strategies. A functioning democracy required informed citizens. So preserving the integrity of public conversations was just as important as ensuring fair elections and representation. For Orwell, tackling these hurdles meant adopting new ways for people to engage with democracy beyond just ticking boxes on election day. People needed avenues to participate in decisions affecting their daily lives, not just choosing between candidates who might or might not represent their interests. Workplace democracy and the idea of organizing within communities and local governments could be fantastic practices for honing the skills and mindset essential for broader democratic participation. It's crucial for folks to view democracy as an everyday practice, not just a box to tick when it's election time. This hands-on approach to democracy is tougher than just electing representatives, but it actually leads to real self-governance and encourages people to be active members of society rather than passive voters. Education is vital for this democratic journey. For people to be truly involved in making democratic decisions, they need to grasp the details of the issues and understand how decisions are made. This means going beyond the basics of reading, writing, and math to include critical thinking, which helps people evaluate different perspectives and catch when someone's trying to deceive them. Knowing history allows people to understand how current issues came to be and what solutions have been tried before. Understanding science is also important for getting a handle on the technical and environmental challenges influencing our policies. Most importantly, there's a need for moral education that encourages empathy, fairness, and thinking about the common good. Orwell understood that democratic systems are fragile and require constant attention. Since democratic values and practices aren't automatically passed down, every generation needs to learn how to maintain them. There will always be powerful groups trying to manipulate democratic processes for their own benefit. During tough times, society might feel tempted to swap democratic processes for quicker, authoritarian solutions. Nationalism, racism, and other divisive forces threaten the mutual understanding and respect that democracy relies on to flourish. Maintaining democracy is not a one-off task. It's a continuous responsibility that involves everyone. The real test for democratic systems is their ability to adapt to change without sacrificing their core principles. New technologies can either enhance citizen participation or increase control by those in power. Global challenges will require collaboration that extends beyond national lines. Environmental issues will demand plans and sacrifices that short-sighted democratic leaders may find hard to implement. If democratic means are not used to address these issues, economic inequality might end up overshadowing political equality. Handling these challenges will determine whether democracy remains viable or is replaced by faster but less humane autocratic systems. Orwell envisioned democracy with a blend of optimism and realism. He believed that ordinary people could govern wisely when given the right tools, knowledge, and opportunities for true self-governance. However, he recognized that keeping these elements in place would require continuous effort and vigilance against forces favoring more rigid, controlled societal structures. Democracy isn't something naturally occurring. It's a crafted concept that needs careful building and consistent updating. Keeping democracy alive involves remaining vigilant and putting in the ongoing work to turn democratic ideals into reality. This responsibility is both the challenge and the privilege of being a citizen in a free society. Part 25. As we come to the end of diving into George Orwell's philosophical views, it's clear that all his thoughts and theories tie into one big picture about human potential. Whether he was pondering language, critiquing the nature of power, analyzing the economy, or exploring psychological insights, Orwell's main aim was consistent. He wanted to uncover what circumstances would allow people to live with dignity, experience true freedom, and find genuine happiness. His mission was to identify the barriers to these circumstances and figure out how to overcome them. At the core, his life's work revolved around a practical question: how do we create a world worth living in? This is why his work continues to resonate with anyone concerned about the future of humanity. Orwell understood that freedom isn't something that magically appears just by removing external restraints. It needs to be actively constructed and continually safeguarded against forces eager to squash it. These threats aren't just the obvious ones like dictatorships or unfair economic systems. They also include subtler foes within us, such as the temptation to be intellectually lazy, the fear of standing up for what's right, and the pressure to conform to societal norms. The real fights for freedom happen inside our minds and hearts. Every person who chooses truth over comfort, who sees through manipulation, and who thinks independently about big issues plays a crucial role in safeguarding our freedom. This insight drove Orwell to emphasize personal responsibility within broader social and political movements. He rejected the idea of focusing solely on the individual without considering the social backdrop, just as he resisted the notion of dissolving individual accountability into a collective identity. While people are shaped by their surroundings, they can also challenge and change those environments through their choices and actions. Creating societal change requires both policy changes and personal transformation. Better institutions can inspire better behavior, but improved behavior is necessary to enhance and sustain those institutions. It's all interconnected, requiring both individual and collective effort. Orwell's vision of a free society was both bold and grounded. It was bold because it championed equality, democracy, and social justice, calling for major shifts in how power is distributed and used. This meant confronting entrenched interests and overhauling age-old institutions. But it was grounded in respect for human nature, cultural traditions, and the practical wisdom of everyday people. His aim was to retain what worked in people's lives while discarding what was unjust and oppressive. This blend of daring change and careful preservation shaped his approach to every big issue he addressed. He aimed to reform economic systems while maintaining cultural connections. He wanted more democracy, but with a strong foundation for individual rights. He saw the potential of technology, but believed humans should have the final say. While he supported global cooperation, he valued local self-reliance. He advocated for broader access to education, but held on to the importance of common sense and practical skills. In all areas, Orwell sought solutions that prioritized human freedom and dignity, steering clear of getting lost in abstract ideological ideals. His political views were pragmatic and people-centered rather than purely theoretical. One of the key lessons we can take from Orwell, especially relevant today, is his recognition that the struggle between freedom and tyranny is never permanently settled. Each new generation faces this challenge in different forms, requiring new solutions. Although the specific threats to human freedom change over time, the fundamental dynamics remain the same. Those in power will always try to expand and solidify their control. Those who benefit from the existing order will resist changes that might affect their privileges. And those living comfortably will often be tempted to ignore the struggles of the less fortunate. To keep from slipping into these patterns, it's really important to be on the lookout and actively resist, especially if you value freedom over mere safety, truth over just being comfortable, and justice over mere orderliness. You've got to pay attention yourself. You can't rely on others to do it for you. Orwell's works shine a light on how crucial it is to be truthful and clear-headed in politics. Based on what he saw, it wasn't so much that people had nasty agendas, but rather that good folks often got too comfy with easy lies instead of confronting the tough truths. Intellectuals often ignored the wrongs done by movements they supported. Politicians made promises they knew they couldn't keep. Many people chose to believe what felt good instead of what the facts showed. Each small fib paved the way for bigger deceptions, until truth almost disappeared. Defending the truth became an essential political act. Those committed to honesty and transparency in public discussions were basically defending the very essence of democracy. Orwell stressed that just being kind and humane often trumps any elaborate political theories. It's about seeing suffering and wanting to fix it, viewing people as valuable, not just tools for a larger goal, having the courage to speak truthfully even when it's not politically easy, standing firm in your beliefs, even if it costs you personally. These basic human qualities are more valuable than all the complex ideologies claiming to solve political problems scientifically. A community that practices kindness would be freer and fairer than the one that follows intricate political theories, but overlooks fundamental human rights and needs. This was a simple but groundbreaking understanding, challenging intellectual arrogance while magnifying the wisdom of regular people. The world Orwell envisioned wasn't a utopia with all problems magically solved. It was a place where people could live with dignity, speak freely, find satisfaction in their work, and participate equally in decisions that mattered to them. It was a place where truth had more weight than power, where personal conscience was valued even if at odds with public opinion, and where humans guided the future, not just unseen forces. Such a world was possible, but only if people understood what was at stake and committed to building something better. Even now, more than 70 years since Orwell's passing, his vision is still relevant. The threats he identified might have evolved, but their core remains the same. New technologies bring both freedom and control. New economic systems present new inequalities alongside prosperity. New political movements offer quick solutions to complex problems, but often demand we stop thinking critically. Modern propaganda techniques exploit the psychological quirks Orwell warned about. Despite all this, Orwell's insights provide hope that these challenges can be overcome if we are wise enough to heed his advice and daring enough to act on it. The liberty of humanity hinges not on the actions of powerful leaders or large systems, but on the everyday choices made by individuals, whether they choose to think for themselves or let others think for them, whether they'll defend truth or let convenient lies slip by, whether they stick to their values or just go with the flow, whether they aim for justice or pursue their own interests. These personal decisions, multiplied by millions, will determine if the 21st century flourishes with freedom or falls into crafty tyranny. George Orwell left us with the insights to make these decisions wisely. He taught us how to detect and resist manipulation, guard truth against distortion, and maintain personal integrity while participating in collective efforts. He taught us to love our own nation without feeling hostility towards others. He showed us how to pursue social justice while also cherishing personal freedom. More than anything, he exemplified how one person, committed to truth and human respect, can truly influence the struggle between freedom and tyranny. The way he lived and what he achieved are both motivational and serve as a guidebook for those unwilling to just accept things as they are. Central to Orwell's lessons is the belief that every single day we are empowered to choose between freedom and oppression. Wins aren't permanent, and neither are losses. Each new generation has the responsibility to forge a community that's just and free. This is both the challenge and privilege of being human in a world where the future is determined by our decisions. George Orwell illuminated what needs to be done and why it's crucial. Now, it's our turn to carry that legacy forward in our own unique ways and times. The struggle between truth and control is ongoing. The outcome is ours to decide.